They say the desert doesn't forget, that the wind still whispers secrets across the canyons where outlaws vanished and legends bled into dust. But what if some of those secrets were never meant to be found? Welcome to the untamed frontier where justice was swift, survival was uncertain, and some stories were never given an ending. Out beyond the reach of law, strange disappearances, ghost towns with no known cause, and bodies found with no known killer became more than folklore. These weren't just tall tales told around the fire, they were real events recorded in old journals, in weathered wanted posters, in half-finished newspaper clippings, and to this day, no one knows the full truth. Why did an entire posse ride into the hills of Arizona and never return? Who left behind a locked strong box in a saloon with blood on the floor but nobody? What moved through the high plains at night, spooking horses and silencing gunslingers without a sound? These are the unsolved mysteries of the Wild West, gritty, haunting, and still echoing across the open range. So sit back, settle in, and ride with us into the shadows of history where the truth waits, buried just beneath the sand. Music. In the heart of Arizona's Superstition Mountains, the desert breathes with an ancient stillness. Here, jagged peaks rise from the scorched earth like the ruins of some forgotten fortress, their sun-baked walls etched with time. The wind moves cautiously through narrow canyons, rattling dry mesquite branches and stirring dust across the parched ground. Even the air seems to carry a quiet warning. Not all who enter leave again. For more than a century, this harsh and beautiful landscape has guarded one of the most enduring legends in the American West, the story of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. The name itself is misleading. The Dutchman in question was actually German, Jacob Waltz, an immigrant from Verburg who settled in the United States in the 1830s. Little is known about his early life, but by the 1860s he had found his way to Arizona Territory, where he worked as a prospector, miner, and occasional farmer. According to local law, Waltz discovered a vein of gold so rich it defied belief. Pure yellow ore said to have been pulled from the side of a mountain with such ease that it spilled like gravel from the rock. But he never told anyone where it was. As the story goes, Waltz fell ill in 1891 and was taken in by a woman named Julia Thomas, a caretaker in Phoenix. In the days before his death, he allegedly confessed the existence of his secret mine and gave Julia vague directions, landmarks, distances, cryptic clues, but no map. After Waltz died, she and several others set out into the superstitions to find the treasure. They returned empty-handed. That might have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Over the decades, the legend grew. Dozens of maps claiming to trace Waltz's lost route began to surface, each one just different enough to breed doubt. Some claim the gold lies beneath Weaver's Needle, a towering spire of rock visible for miles. Others suggest hidden tunnels, sacred ground, or buried Spanish vaults. More than a few seekers have met mysterious ends, disappearances, accidents, unexplained deaths, earning the region a reputation as both cursed and sacred. What then is the truth? Historically, the Superstition Mountains have long been shrouded in mystery. The Puma and Apache peoples, whose ancestors inhabited this land for centuries, warned of strange happenings in the range, stories of thunder gods, lost spirits, and the place where the rocks move. Spanish conquistadors were said to have passed through in the 16th century, and some accounts suggest they may have hidden gold in the area. One story tells of the Peralta family, a wealthy Mexican clan who operated secret mines in the Superstitions during the early 1800s before being massacred by Apache warriors. According to this version, Jacob Waltz somehow discovered or inherited their hidden mine years later. But there is little documentation to verify this. Skeptics argue that the legend is simply that, a legend. They point out that there's no geological evidence to support the existence of a massive gold deposit in the Superstition Range. The mountains made of ancient volcanic rock are not known to host significant gold veins, and Jacob Waltz, while a real person, never registered any major mining claim in the area. If he truly had access to such vast wealth, why did he live modestly and die poor? Still, the testimony of those who knew him complicates the story. Julia Thomas reportedly said Waltz showed her gold nuggets of unusual purity, unlike anything commercially mined in Arizona at the time. Others claim to have seen him trade raw gold on multiple occasions. Some suggest he didn't mine the gold at all, but found it, perhaps taken from an old Spanish or Native American cache, or even from a previous expedition that never made it out. And then there are the stranger theories. Some believe the mine is protected, not just by treacherous terrain, but by something more. Some say the spirits of the Apache guard it. Others believe that electromagnetic anomalies in the mountains disrupt compasses and confuse GPS devices, creating a natural veil over the landscape. A few fringe theorists even propose the area hides something far older than gold, remnants of a pre-Columbian civilization, or clues to ancient visitors whose origins lie far beyond Earth. None of these ideas can be proven, but none have been entirely disproven either. To this day, people still go looking. Some arrive with metal detectors and hand-drawn maps, others with nothing more than a dream and an old story passed down through family lines. The search has claimed lives, sparked lawsuits and driven people to obsession. And yet, no one, not one person, has ever produced definitive proof of the mine's location, or even that it existed. Is it possible that Waltz fabricated the story? That the mine, if it ever existed, has long since caved in or been lost beneath centuries of rockfall and erosion? Or is it still out there, hidden in some narrow ravine where the sun never reaches, waiting for the right eyes to find it? In the Superstition Mountains, time moves differently. Shadows stretch long and secrets linger. For every answer unearthed, two more questions seem to take its place. And so, the mystery remains. How much of the legend is true? What did Jacob Waltz really know? And perhaps most intriguing of all, what lies just beyond the last known trail where the map ends and the wild begins? April 3rd, 1882, St. Joseph, Missouri. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that settles in a home before the day begins in earnest. The rented clapboard house on Lafayette Street stood unremarkable, a modest white structure nestled among the hills of the Missouri River Valley. Inside, the infamous outlaw Jesse James was said to be dusting a picture on the wall when a single shot rang out, echoing through the narrow rooms. It struck behind his left ear. He collapsed instantly, dead before he hit the floor. That, at least, is how the story is told. Jesse Woodson, James, former Confederate guerrilla and the legendary leader of the James Younger Gang, was 34 years old. His death, like his life, became legend. Shot from behind by Robert Ford, a member of his own gang, a man Jesse had trusted. The official version is simple. Robert Ford killed Jesse James for the $10,000 reward placed on his head by the governor of Missouri. In return, Ford received a pardon and brief notoriety as the dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard, a line made famous in folk ballads sung across the country. But as with many things in the fading light of the Old West, the truth may not be so clear. The body that lay in the parlour of the James home was buried under the name Thomas Howard, an alias Jesse had used during his final years in hiding. Only close family and a few local officials viewed the corpse. Rumours soon began to stir, whispers in back rooms at barbershops and on trains. What if it wasn't really Jesse James? The question lingered. It's important to understand that Jesse James was more than an outlaw. He was a symbol. To some, a folk hero who resisted federal authority in the post-war South. To others, a cold-blooded killer responsible for brutal robberies and senseless deaths. His notoriety stretched far beyond Missouri, and so did the public's fascination with him. As the years passed, many found it hard to accept that such a larger-than-life figure could be ended by a single cowardly shot in a quiet house. Doubt fed the legend. Those who questioned the official story pointed to inconsistencies in the body. A man who had supposedly suffered numerous battlefield injuries bore no signs of certain scars Jesse James was known to have. Some claimed the corpse's teeth didn't match known dental records. Others noted a lack of surviving photographs taken after the death. Strange considering Jesse's fame and the government's interest in confirming the kill. And then stranger stories began to emerge. Decades after his supposed death, men appeared in small towns claiming to be Jesse James. Some were quickly dismissed, others gained surprising followings. The most well-known was J. Frank Dalton, who came forward in the 1940s, elderly and weathered, asserting he was the real Jesse, now living under a new name to avoid retribution. He bore a remarkable resemblance to aged photos of James and possessed intimate knowledge of historical events only Jesse might have known. Supporters gathered. Interviews were conducted. Reporters covered his claims with cautious fascination. But the evidence was murky. Dalton's stories often changed. Dates shifted, names blurred. He died in 1951, buried in Texas beneath a headstone that read, Jesse Woodson James. Even DNA has not put the matter fully to rest. In 1995, Jesse James's supposed remains, buried under a newer headstone at the family farm in Kearney, Missouri, were exhumed. Forensic scientists conducted mitochondrial DNA testing, comparing samples from the remains to known maternal relatives. The results matched. Most historians now accept that Jesse James truly died in 1882, but some still raise questions. Mitochondrial DNA only confirms maternal lineage. Critics argue that this would match not only Jesse, but potentially cousins or other maternal relatives. Some even suggest the body buried in Missouri might be someone close to Jesse, killed and passed off as him to allow his escape. Why would Jesse stage his own death? One theory holds that Jesse had grown tired of running. The law was closing in. Betrayal was likely. He may have struck a secret deal with officials or used Ford as a willing pawn in a plan to vanish. Others propose that he simply wanted peace to shed the weight of his reputation and live out his days in obscurity. But that raises a question. If Jesse James had lived, where did he go? Over the years, accounts have surfaced of man fitting Jesse's description living under aliases in Texas, Louisiana, even as far away as South America. Anecdotes, often second-hand or drawn from decades-old recollections, tell of a quiet man who spoke of the war and of lost brothers, a man who watched the world change around him, nameless until he passed into history once more. Of course, stories like these are difficult to verify. Time erodes evidence, memory plays tricks, and history, particularly when it involves icons like Jesse James, is easily blurred with myth. Still, one can't help but wonder, why did Robert Ford act when he did, so suddenly, so decisively? Why was Jesse's body shown to so few? Why do some historical records conflict on seemingly simple details like the angle of the gunshot or the way the body was dressed? Why has the legend endured for so long? Perhaps because in the American imagination, death should match the life it ends, and for a man like Jesse James, gunfighter, outlaw, Confederate rebel, folk hero, an ending so mundane feels suspicious. In a land of shifting frontiers and fading justice, where outlaws became icons and lawmen were not always clean, the line between fact and legend runs thin. And somewhere along that line, Jesse James still rides. The desert stretches wide in the American Southwest, silent, sun-bleached, and seemingly endless. In the distance, red rock cliffs rise like the backs of sleeping giants. Sagebrush rustles in the wind, and the sky, vast and cloudless, hums with the weight of time. It's a place where the land feels ancient, untouched, and watching. And it's here, somewhere between the baked earth and the open sky, that one of the strangest and most enduring mysteries of the American frontier took flight. They call it the Thunderbird photograph. The story begins not in prehistory, but in the ink-stained pages of 20th century memory. By the 1960s and 70s, tales of a peculiar image began to circulate among readers of strange news and frontier lore. The photograph, according to countless independent recollections, was said to have appeared in an old issue of a widely read publication, possibly the Tombstone Epitaph, or perhaps Wide World of the Unknown, Fate magazine, or even Ripley's Believe It or Not. The details were hazy, but the image itself that people remembered. It showed reportedly a group of frontier men standing before a massive winged creature nailed to a barn wall. The wingspan was astonishing. Some claimed over 20 ft across. The body resembled a bird or something bird-like, leathery, more reptilian than feathered. Its wings, they said, were bat-like. Some compared it to a pterosaur, a flying reptile thought to have gone extinct 66 million years ago. And yet no one can find the photo. Despite decades of searching, the original image has never surfaced. People recall seeing it clearly in print with specific poses, the outline of the men, the angle of the sun, but no verifiable copy has ever been found in any archive. Not in newspaper morgues, not in magazine collections, not in the basement of long-time encrypted researchers. Still, the legend endures. Where did the Thunderbird photograph come from? Did it ever exist? To understand the fascination, we have to look further back into the deep-rooted mythology of the Thunderbird itself. Long before newspapers or photographs, indigenous peoples across North America told stories of enormous birds with the power to summon storms. The Lakota, Ojibwe and Algonquin nations all describe the Thunderbird in rich oral traditions. It is not just a bird, but a spirit, an elemental force. When it beats its wings, thunder rolls across the plains. Lightning flashes from its eyes. It is a creature of awe, of power, and sometimes of warning. Could the story of the photograph be a modern echo of something older? A merging of folklore with the fast-moving machinery of print and myth. The earliest versions of the Thunderbird photograph legend often date back to the 1800s. One of the most cited accounts comes from the town of Tombstone, Arizona in 1890. According to some reports, though sources are inconsistent, 2 ranchers were said to have shot down an enormous flying creature near the Hooker Mountains. They allegedly brought the body back, stretched it out against a barn, and posed for a photograph. The image was said to have been published in the Tombstone Epitaph, and yet no known issue contains it. Researchers have combed through archives, microfilm, and antique stores. Dozens of people swear they've seen the photo, but each time someone tries to locate it, it seems to disappear like a mirage in the heat. Skeptics suggest this is a case of collective false memory, that people over time came to believe in a photograph that never was, perhaps influenced by similar images in movies, hoaxes, or early pulp illustrations. The human brain, after all, is prone to filling in gaps, especially when emotion or nostalgia is involved. Some even point to the Mandela effect, a phenomenon where groups of people remember the same inaccurate detail, such as the spelling of a brand name or the timing of a historical event. But what if they're not mistaken? What if the photo did exist and was lost, buried, or deliberately hidden? Some cryptozoologists and fringe historians argue that the Thunderbird photo may have been real but suppressed. Perhaps it was pulled from publication to avoid panic, or perhaps it was acquired by a private collector, someone with a vested interest in keeping such a discovery out of public hands. There are even theories, unsupported but persistent, that the creature may have been a surviving remnant of an ancient species, a pterosaur isolated in the deep canyons of the Southwest, unknown to modern science. It's worth noting that the American frontier in the late 19th century was a time of incredible discovery and confusion. Strange fossils were being unearthed regularly. The idea of extinction was still relatively new. The lines between science and spectacle often blurred. A photograph of a prehistoric monster might have been treated as little more than sensational news, or dismissed as a hoax, even if it were genuine. Then again, the photo may have never existed at all, just a compelling story repeated often enough to become real in the mind's eye. To this day, recreations of the Thunderbird photograph continue to appear online. Some intentionally fictional, others mistaken for the original. None, however, have ever been confirmed as the one so many remember, and that leads us back to the central question: why do so many people remember something no one can find? Is it a trick of memory fed by years of repetition and storytelling? A forgotten publication now lost to time? Or could the truth lie in a dusty attic in a shoebox of yellowed papers? The photograph is still waiting to be rediscovered in a land shaped by wind, legend, and silence. Sometimes the most powerful mysteries are the ones we almost remember, and somewhere perhaps the Thunderbird still sources. The Big Bend region of West Texas is an unforgiving place. The Chihuahuan Desert stretches out in jagged ridges and unsecured plains, broken only by the winding path of the Rio Grande, and the occasional silhouette of desert brush clinging to life. The land is silent, remote, and vast. So vast that secrets can lie hidden here for generations, untouched by time or memory. And somewhere, it said, among these shifting stones and sun-beaten messes, lies a mine, a vein of gold so rich it could have changed the course of history. But if it ever existed, it vanished without a trace. This is the story of the lost gold mine. The name, jarring by modern standards, dates back to the 1870s, rooted in frontier vernacular and a story passed down through oral tradition rather than official record. At the centre of the legend is a black man known only as Ben, sometimes called Ben Subel, though the details vary depending on the teller. Some accounts describe him as a former slave, others suggest he was a freeman, a cook, or a hired hand for prospectors moving through West Texas. But all versions agree on one thing: Ben found gold. Not flakes in a stream, or hints in quartz. Gold ore, pure and plentiful, pulled from a hidden mine deep in the desert. According to legend, Ben would disappear into the hills alone for days at a time, returning to camp with pockets full of gold nuggets, enough to raise eyebrows, but never quite enough to start a gold rush. He never revealed the location of the mine, not even under pressure or threat, and when he died, suddenly, as some say, or quietly in his sleep, he took the secret with him. Over the decades, the story spread. Cowboys, prospectors, and treasure hunters combed the mountains between the Pacas River and the Rio Grande, from the Chinati Mountains to the Davis Range. Some claimed they found the mine and lost it again. Others vanished in the search, but the gold was never recovered. The mine was never located. What makes this legend so persistent? Is it just the allure of untapped wealth? Or is there something deeper? Something about the way this particular story fits into the mythos of the Old West? Unlike many lost treasure tales, this one carries an edge of authenticity. People who knew Ben, or claimed to swore they saw the gold with their own eyes. The ore, they said, was of a quality unmatched in the region. Historians note that several documented gold strikes did occur in West Texas around that time, though most were minor or short-lived. Could Ben have stumbled upon a uniquely rich deposit, a pocket geologists simply missed? The Big Bend terrain is a patchwork of volcanic history and mineral deposits. Gold exists in small quantities, but rarely in the kind of concentrated veins described in the legend. Still, the region remains vastly underexplored geologically speaking. In such an isolated landscape, could a small hidden mine, perhaps sealed by rockfall or buried by a landslide, evade discovery for over a century? Some researchers believe so. In fact, as recently as the 20th century, treasure maps began to surface. Hand-drawn diagrams passed down through families, old journal entries recovered from dusty trunks. They point to specific landmarks: Myers Peaks, Terlingua Creek, an abandoned adobe ruin, or a dry canyon pass. But each map tells a slightly different story. The directions twist, the features change, and the mind remains lost. There are those who think the whole tale is a fabrication, a frontier tale told around campfires and saloons, passed down for the thrill of mystery. Perhaps Ben never had a mine. Maybe he found a small cache of placer gold and let people assume the rest. Or maybe the legend grew after his death, shaped by those eager to believe that riches were just over the next hill. But even this skepticism doesn't explain why so many still search. Throughout the 1900s and into the present day, amateur prospectors have returned to the region, driven by stories and intuition. In the 1930s, a man named William Brick claimed he found the mine but lost his map in a flash flood. In the 1980s, rumours circulated about an unnamed Mexican national who discovered gold nuggets in the Sierra Vieja, only to vanish before sharing the site. Each generation adds another layer, another thread in the fabric of the mystery. Some have speculated that the mine may not be natural at all, that it could be connected to older legends, Spanish missionaries, hidden treasure routes, even indigenous stories of sacred mountains holding riches guarded by spirits. In these versions, the gold is not simply lost. It is meant to stay hidden, protected by forces beyond human control or understanding. Could there be truth buried in the legend? Perhaps the mine did exist, real, tangible, once open to the sky, and perhaps nature, time, and silence conspired to cover it over. Or perhaps it exists only in the collective imagination of a restless frontier, where every canyon might hold a secret, and every lost path leads just one step away from fortune. The desert keeps its silence. It offers no answers, only the occasional whisper of wind through stone and brush. And so the search continues year after year, generation after generation. A quest not only for gold, but for something more elusive. A glimpse into the unknown, a connection to a story just out of reach. Could the lost mind still be waiting somewhere out there in the shadow of the mountains? Or is the legend itself the only treasure we're meant to find? The American Southwest is a place of quiet defiance, a land that seems, even now, to resist being tamed. High deserts roll into distant ranges, where rugged cliffs glow red in the morning light and canyons hide in shadow long after the sun has risen. Water is scarce, paths disappear, and stories linger in the stillness like heat rising from the rocks. Somewhere in this vast expanse, perhaps in the mountains of western New Mexico, or the edge of the Arizona border, lies one of the most enduring legends of lost treasure in the American frontier. It's known as the Lost Adams Diggings. The name comes from a man identified only as Adams. No first name, no verified history, just Adams, a prospector, perhaps a Civil War veteran, possibly from the East. What we know of him comes not from official documents, but from stories told around fires, in saloons, and eventually in newspaper columns and dusty mining journals. And according to those stories, sometime in the early 1860s, Adams claimed to have found something extraordinary, a canyon filled with gold. The tale begins, like so many in the West, with a chance encounter. Adams was said to have joined a small group of men travelling with a native guide, possibly Apache, possibly of another nearby tribe. The guide, reluctant at first, was eventually persuaded to lead the group to a secret place his people had long protected. A place, he said, that was sacred, dangerous, not meant for outsiders. After days of travel through harsh terrain, the party arrived at a remote canyon. The walls were steep and narrow, the entrance hidden by thick stands of pine. Water flowed freely through its centre, and along the stream bed, scattered casually as if by accident, were gold nuggets. Not dust, not ore, but heavy, clean nuggets, some the size of a man's thumb. For a time, the men worked in near silence, gathering as much gold as they could carry. They built crude shelters and intended to return with supplies and help. But then came the warning. The guide, according to Adams, urged them to leave immediately, that staying longer would bring death. They didn't listen. One night, while Adams was away from the main camp, perhaps scouting for game or water, he heard the sound of gunfire. By the time he returned, it was over. The camp had been attacked. The men were dead. The gold is gone. The guide too had vanished. Wounded and alone, Adams barely escaped with his life. When he finally returned to civilization, he spoke of the canyon with wide eyes and trembling hands. He tried to find it again, many times, for years. But no matter how far he rode or how many peaks he climbed, he never found the canyon again. The story should have ended there. Like so many frontier tragedies, half true, half imagined. But it didn't. Instead, it grew. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, dozens of treasure seekers ventured into the high country between the Zuri Mountains and the Mogollon Rim. Some returned empty-handed. Others never returned at all. A few claimed they'd seen something, an unfamiliar rock formation, a strange canyon floor, but could never retrace their steps. Newspapers of the era ran headlines promising clues to Adams' lost gold. Local ranchers told of strangers appearing suddenly, asking questions, leaving maps drawn on scraps of leather or the backs of old photographs. One man in 1930 claimed to have found gold nuggets matching the original descriptions near a hidden gorge southwest of Reserve, New Mexico. Another in the 1950s claimed he discovered a sealed-off cave lined with quartz and metal, only to find the entrance blocked the next day. And still, the diggings were never found. What makes the legend of the Lost Adams digging so enduring isn't just the lure of gold, it's the sense that the story refuses to settle. For every skeptic who dismisses it as folklore, another researcher presents a new theory, a new clue. Some point to possible geological evidence, mineral traces found in certain streams, historic mining records referencing unexplored canyons. Others suggest that the tale is a hybrid of multiple discoveries conflated into one. It's plausible, they argue, that Adams did find gold, just not in the way the story suggests. Perhaps it was placer gold from a surface deposit, not a hidden mine. Perhaps the canyon was no more than a remote riverbed, long since changed by erosion or flooding. And then there are the more speculative interpretations. Could Adams have stumbled into an area protected by an indigenous group that wished to keep its location secret? Did he survive an ambush intended to protect not gold but sacred land? Some suggest the story is not about gold at all, but about memory, trauma, and the human desire to turn grief into meaning. Others wonder, did someone else find the canyon after Adams? Could the gold have been removed, hidden, or consumed in silence by a small group who vowed never to reveal its location? Even today, the mystery remains unsolved. Modern technology, satellite imagery, GPS mapping, even drone surveys has yet to yield a confirmed site. There is no known place that perfectly matches Adams' description. A narrow box canyon with pine-covered ridges, a clear stream, and gold as plentiful as firewood. And yet, people still search. There's something about the story that feels unfinished, something about Adams's journey, the violence that ended it, and the silence that followed that continues to pull at the imagination. Could the canyon still be out there somewhere beyond the edge of the known trail? Or is the real treasure not in gold at all, but in the mystery that refuses to be solved? From the red cliffs of Escalante to the silent depths of Glen Canyon, southern Utah is a land of haunting beauty, an endless maze of sandstone, mesas, and sheer rock walls that seem carved by time itself. In the early light, the canyons glow with shades of gold and crimson, their edges softened by silence. It's a place where the horizon seems to breathe, a place where one could vanish without a trace, and someone did. In November of 1934, a 20-year-old wanderer named Everett Ruse disappeared into this landscape. A poet, an artist, a solitary explorer driven not by gold or conquest, but by a deep, almost spiritual connection to the American wilderness, and since his story has lingered like the echo of footsteps on dry stone, fading, elusive, and never fully explained. Ruse was not a typical figure of the Wild West, at least not in the way outlaws or prospectors are remembered, but he was of the West, drawn to it in a way that few others understood. Born in Los Angeles in 1914, Everett was introspective and precocious. He wrote extensively from a young age and began venturing alone into the wilderness as a teenager, carrying little more than a few supplies, his notebooks, and a love of solitude. Between 1931 and 1934, he explored thousands of miles across California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. He documented his travels through letters and journals filled with vivid lyrical descriptions. He carved his name Nemo, Latin for no one, into canyon walls, and often travelled with his burros, singing to them as he walked. He seemed determined to dissolve into the landscape to live not alongside nature, but inside it. By the fall of 1934, he had reached the Escalante region of southern Utah, a remote, harsh, and awe-inspiring terrain. He was last seen in the tiny settlement of Escalante, collecting supplies before heading southeast toward the Hole in the Rock area and Davis Gulch. His plan was to winter in the canyon lands. He was never seen again. Weeks passed, then months. His family grew anxious, and eventually search parties were sent into the desert. What they found only deepened the mystery. Near Davis Gulch, a remote tributary of the Escalante River, they discovered two of Everett's burros tied to a tree, alive but weathered. Nearby, his camp was found, intact and seemingly undisturbed. His diary, carvings and supplies remained, but there was no sign of Everett himself. No body, no struggle, no clear explanation, only silence. For decades, the disappearance of Everett Ruse has remained one of the most haunting, unsolved stories of the American West. How does a young man vanish so completely? In a world not yet conquered by satellite or GPS, the canyon lands offered both sanctuary and secrecy. Could he have fallen, been swept away by a flash flood, or was something more human involved? Some believe Ruse met a tragic but accidental end, perhaps slipping while climbing or drowning in a sudden rain-swollen stream. The terrain around Davis Gulch is steep and treacherous, prone to rockfall and prone to swallowing evidence. If he died alone, exposed, it's possible nature reclaimed him entirely, leaving no bones, no belongings, nothing that would survive 80 years of sun and sand. But others suggest darker possibilities. Could Ruse have encountered someone in the canyons, cattle rustlers, outlaws, or even hostile locals who saw him as a threat or an opportunity? There are stories, unconfirmed but persistent, of strangers riding through southern Utah in the 1930s carrying gear that resembled Everett's, and there were whispers in some nearby communities that Everett had been murdered and buried in an unmarked grave. In 2009, those whispers seemed to gain traction when a team of researchers uncovered a Navajo oral history describing the murder of a young white man in that time and region. A body was found, bones buried in a shallow grave near Combe Ridge. Initial testing suggested a match with Ruiz's DNA, and for a brief moment it seemed the mystery had been solved, but further analysis cast doubt. The genetic markers didn't align closely enough. The bones belonged to someone else, and the canyon held its secret. Once again, there are those who wonder whether Ruse staged his own disappearance. He spoke often in his writing of leaving the world behind, of becoming one with the wild. "I shall not return," he wrote in one of his last letters. Was it poetic flourish or something more? Did he seek isolation so complete that he chose never to return, either by design or by ending his life somewhere no one would ever find him? Or did he survive, change his name, and live out his days far from the spotlight, far from expectation? Less likely, perhaps, but in the absence of proof, speculation endures. Even now, hikers in southern Utah report spotting the name Nemo carved into stone. Some may be genuine, others the work of imitators, but all serve as reminders of the one who walked before them alone in silence, seeking something vast and unknowable. The story of Everett Russ is not just about disappearance, it's about the pull of wilderness, the desire to be free of society's grip, and the fine line between passion and peril. His voice remains in his letters and his art, filled with awe for the canyons and cliffs, with reverence for the desert sky. And the question remains, what really happened in that narrow canyon nearly a century ago? Is his final resting place hidden beneath windswept stone, marked only by fading initials on a canyon wall? Or did Everett Ruiz finally find the complete solitude he spent his short life chasing? Out there somewhere, just beyond the last bend in the trail, east of the Sierra Nevada, beyond the shadow of Yosemite's granite cliffs, lies a plateau where silence moves like dust across the earth. The wind whistles through cracked wooden beams and rattles rusted door hinges. Sunlight flickers off broken glass, filtering through shattered windows into rooms abandoned for over a century. This is Bod, a ghost town frozen in time. But some say it's more than that. Some say Bod never fully let go of its dead. The town sits at over 8,000 ft in the high desert of California. Dry, windblown and eerily preserved, Body looks like it could awaken at any moment, if only the clock still ticked. In its prime during the late 1870s and early 1880s, Bod was one of the West's wildest boomtowns. A gold rush settlement turned into a lawless frontier city. It drew fortune seekers, outlaws, and families alike, all chasing wealth buried beneath the earth. By 1879, Bod's population soared to nearly 10,000. Dozens of saloons lined the main street. There were opium dens, gambling halls, and brothels, each humming with the chaos of fast fortunes and faster tempers. Violence was commonplace. Death came easily in Bod, whether by gunshot, mining accident, disease, or the unforgiving cold. Locals coined a chilling phrase, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Bod." But like so many mining towns, Bod's prosperity was brief. As the gold veins thinned and the ore grew harder to extract, the population began to dwindle. By the early 1900s, most had left. By the 1940s, Bod was abandoned entirely. Today it stands preserved in a state of arrested decay, maintained by California state parks as a historic site. The buildings still lean under the weight of time, but their interiors remain largely untouched. Shelves stocked, chairs askew, dishes left on tables as if the owners had simply stepped out for a moment. And yet, there's something else, something hard to explain. Visitors and park rangers alike have long reported strange occurrences. Footsteps in empty rooms, cold spots on windless days, the sound of children laughing where there are none, doors slamming shut, lights flickering in buildings with no electricity. But the most enduring and unsettling part of Bod's legend is something whispered by those who know the town best: the body curse. According to this legend, those who take anything from the town, no matter how small, bring misfortune upon themselves. Pebbles, nails, glass shards, even old coins. The curse is said to follow the thief home, manifesting as accidents, illness, heartbreak, or worse. And perhaps most curiously, many of those who took something eventually send it back. The Bowdy State Historic Park Office receives dozens of letters each year, often with no return address. The contents: fragments of the town, a rock, a broken bottle, a rusty nail. Some of the letters are apologetic, others are desperate. People write of marriages collapsing, cars crashing, mysterious illnesses, bad luck that began only after they pocketed a piece of body. One letter reads, "I took this small piece of wood from a doorway. Since then everything has gone wrong. Please return it. I am sorry." Another recounts a string of tragic events after a single rock was taken during a visit, ending with a simple plea: make it stop. Are these stories coincidences, the product of guilt? Or is there something else at work, something that lingers among the splintered beams and sagging rooftops? Skeptics, of course, have explanations: confirmation bias, the human tendency to look for cause and effect in moments of fear or misfortune. It's easy, they argue, to blame a curse when life goes wrong, and the park's policy prohibiting souvenir collecting certainly encourages the legend, whether intentionally or not. The curse becomes a moral tale: respect the past, leave things as you found them. But then there are the eyewitness accounts, rangers who refuse to enter certain buildings after dark, tourists who swear they heard voices in empty hallways or saw figures through second-story windows. Windows are no longer attached to rooms with floors. One ranger claimed to feel a distinct hand on her shoulder in the old cane house, only to turn and find the room empty. Another spoke of waking to the sound of boots pacing outside his cabin, steady, deliberate steps that stopped when he opened the door. In the former Undertaker's building, visitors sometimes report a heavy sense of sadness, even nausea, as if the space itself remembers grief. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain without warning, dogs bark at nothing. There are no official explanations, no endorsed narratives. Body stewards remain careful not to promote the supernatural aspects of the site, but neither do they deny the stories. And perhaps that's part of what makes the body curse so compelling. Unlike the drama of gold heists or gunfights, this legend is quiet, personal. It seeps into lives long after people leave. Its reach extends far beyond the brittle remains of the town. There are no violent spectres or vengeful apparitions, just a sense that something doesn't want to be disturbed. Could it be the spirits of those who never left? The miners buried in the windswept cemetery on the hill? The children lost to disease? The women who suffered quietly behind drawn curtains in tiny clapboard homes? Or could the curse be something less literal, something about the place itself? A presence born not of ghosts but of memory, a warning carved into the very grain of the wood and the grit of the soil. That history isn't just a collection of objects to be taken, it's a weight, a legacy. And so the mystery endures. Why do so many who take from Bod feel compelled to return what they stole? Why does the town, long emptied of life, still feel aware? In a land filled with legends, the curse of Bod doesn't scream, it whispers. And in those whispers, it asks a question no one has yet been able to answer. What exactly did we leave behind? Just beyond the rugged hills of southeastern Arizona, where the desert meets the edge of the Pelanchillo Mountains, there lies a pass cut deep into the rock, a narrow, windswept corridor that whispers with the ghosts of long-forgotten riders. This is Skeleton Canyon. Dry and remote, its slopes are lined with mesquite, ocato, and sun-bleached rock. The wind moves with a lonely hush, as if careful not to wake the past. It's here in this stark and silent place that one of the West's most enduring legends was born. They say a fortune in gold lies buried beneath this scorched earth, hidden somewhere in the shadows of Skeleton Canyon. Coins, bars, church relics, enough to make men rich beyond imagination. But like so many treasures of the American frontier, its story begins with blood. The year was 1881. The region, a lawless stretch near the border between Arizona and Mexico, was a haven for smugglers, outlaws, and renegade Apaches. Violence was frequent, the terrain unforgiving. Into this cauldron rode a band of Mexican revolutionaries, fugitives, some say, or deserters from the Mexican army. Others claim they were not deserters at all, but couriers entrusted with an enormous cache of treasure seized from church missions, government vaults, or wealthy estates during a time of political upheaval. According to legend, they crossed into the United States carrying mule trains laden with gold and silver, heading north through Sonora, then across the border, seeking a place to hide their ill-gotten gains until it was safe to return. But they never made it. As the story goes, the group was ambushed by American outlaws, possibly the notorious Clanton Gang or other rustlers who had taken refuge in the hills. The attack was swift and brutal. The Mexican riders were slaughtered, their bodies left to decay in the canyon that would earn its grim name from the remains later found there. Skeletons scattered across the rocks. What happened next is murky. The gold, it seems, was never seen again. Perhaps the ambushers took it and disappeared. Perhaps fearing pursuit or retaliation, they buried it, intending to return. If so, they never did. Some suggest a second betrayal occurred, that the killers were themselves ambushed in turn. The canyon, it said, devoured them all. Over the decades that followed, rumours spread like wildfire. Locals whispered of Spanish coins found near dry washes or rusted bridle bits unearthed by rain. In the early 20th century, ranchers and treasure hunters scoured the canyon floor with shovels and picks, guided by scraps of old maps and the desperate hope of fortune. One man claimed to have found a small chest containing gold crucifixes. Another spoke of a crude stone marker etched with strange symbols. Each account added fuel to the mystery. None provided proof. There are historical records of violence in Skeleton Canyon during that time. At least one documented massacre occurred in 1881, likely involving bandits and Mexican nationals. Bodies were indeed discovered in the canyon, but no official inventory of treasure was ever recovered, and no confirmed hoard has been found. Still, the story persists. Could the treasure be real? Could it still lie hidden, buried under layers of sand and time? Some researchers believe the legend is a conflation of several true events, smuggling routes, ambushes, and crossbred raids woven together into a single narrative. In the Old West, stories travelled fast, changing shape with each retelling. A coin found here, a rumour heard there, and suddenly you have a buried fortune. But even the skeptics can't explain the frequency of strange findings in the region. In the 1920s, a prospector claimed he unearthed a weathered saddlebag filled with antique coins, Mexican pesos and Spanish reales. In the 1940s, a rusted rifle was discovered near a dry ravine, resting alongside what appeared to be military-style buttons, possibly of Mexican origin. Artifacts, yes. But were they clues, or relics of a different tale entirely? Then there are the stories of those who never returned. In 1963, 2 amateur treasure hunters from New Mexico vanished while searching Skeleton Canyon. Their truck was found abandoned, their campsite intact. No signs of struggle, no bodies, just silence. Some said they got lost, others whispered darker theories. Had they found something they weren't meant to? Had the curse of Skeleton Canyon claimed them to? There are no verified maps, no reliable coordinates, only fragments. Legends passed down in border towns, diaries that mention hidden gold in the canyon beyond the hill, letters describing markers that shift with the seasons. No one can say for certain what's fact and what's fabrication. And yet, people still search. Today, Skeleton Canyon is part of the Coronado National Forest, a protected and often overlooked swath of wild, desolate land. It's a place few travellers pass through, and even fewer understand. The silence there feels thick, almost watchful. Metal detectors occasionally hum through the brush. Shovels strike rock, but the canyon gives nothing easily. Is the treasure still there, buried beneath layers of stone, sealed by floods and erosion? Or is the legend itself the treasure preserved in the memory of a place that still refuses to give up its dead? One can stand among the dry grasses of Skeleton Canyon and imagine it all playing out. The mules laden with gold, the gunfire echoing off canyon walls, the last breath of a man who thought he had outrun his past. Somewhere out here is the truth, or at least the shadow of it. Could it be that the canyon still guards what was stolen so long ago? Or has time erased every trace? The answers, if they exist, remain buried, just out of reach beneath the dust of the forgotten West. The Messina Valley in southern New Mexico is a place of vast, sun-drenched emptiness. Along its winding trails and sage brush-covered plains, the land stretches wide and open, harsh and unrelenting under the desert sun. Shadows cast by rocky outcroppings stretch long in the fading light, and the silence here feels deeper than in most places. It was along these desolate roads, not far from the Oregon mountains, that a father and son vanished, leaving behind only a few signs of struggle and a mystery that has haunted the region for well over a century. On February 1st, 1896, Colonel Albert Jennings Fountain and his 8-year-old son Henry began the final leg of their journey home. They had just departed Lincoln, New Mexico, a name already steeped in legend, where Fountain had been working on grand jury indictments against a number of suspected cattle rustlers. At the time, he was one of the territory's most prominent figures, a lawyer, a former state senator, and a decorated Union officer from the Civil War, a man not easily intimidated nor prone to paranoia. But he had reason to be cautious. Fountain had recently been investigating powerful ranching interests, men with influence, money, and in some cases, known ties to violence. Among those he was preparing to prosecute was Oliver Lee, a controversial rancher with a volatile reputation. Tensions in the territory had been simmering for years, and Fountain, outspoken and principled, had made enemies. As he and young Henry made their way back toward their home in Messia, they travelled by buckboard wagon, a common and vulnerable mode of transport. No escort, just a rifle, a revolver, and the trust that law and reputation might still carry some weight in the unforgiving land. They never arrived. 2 days later, the wagon was found abandoned near White Sands, its contents rifled through, papers scattered, and ominously blood on the ground. Nearby were tracks indicating that the wagon had stopped and that multiple horses had surrounded it. Among the debris was Colonel Fountain's empty cartridge belt and a blood-stained handkerchief, but there were no bodies, no sign of the boy, no definitive answer to what had transpired. Immediately suspicion fell on those who stood to lose the most from Fountain's legal work. Chief among them, Oliver Lee and his associates. Lawman Pat Garrett, famous for his role in killing Billy the Kid, was tasked with investigating. Garrett had already lost favour with many in the region, but he pursued the case nonetheless, eventually arresting Lee and 2 others, including Jim Gilland. At the trial, however, the evidence proved too circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses, no physical remains. The defence suggested the Fountains could have staged their own disappearance, though to what end was never made clear. The jury deliberated and returned with a verdict of not guilty. The accused walked free, but the mystery didn't end there. Over the decades that followed, the story of the Fountain disappearance became more than a legal case. It became a legend. Locals whispered of hidden graves in the desert, of men who took secrets to theirs. Some claimed Lee later admitted to involvement on his deathbed. Others insisted he was framed by a corrupt system. Rumours circulated about a canyon near Dog Canyon where the bodies may have been buried. Still others believed they had been taken across the border and silenced forever. No trace of Albert or Henry Fountain was ever found. Not a bone, not a boot, nothing. Was it an ambush calculated and precise by men with too much to lose? Or something more chaotic, an act of revenge turned into cover-up? There are theories that Fountain's own political manoeuvring may have put him at odds with not just ranchers, but other power players in the territory. At the time, the line between law and outlaw was perilously thin. Many lawmen had outlaw pasts. Many outlaws held court and local politics. Could someone inside the system have orchestrated the disappearance? And what of the boy? Henry's presence is what makes the story especially difficult to dismiss. He was innocent, just 8 years old. Was he collateral damage or a victim to ensure silence? The cold logic of the frontier could be pitiless, even toward children. But the lack of remains has always puzzled investigators. Would such brutal men really go to such lengths to erase every trace? Or did someone else intervene? In more recent years, archaeological teams and amateur historians have returned to the terrain near where the wagon was found. Some have used ground-penetrating radar. Others have followed old newspaper clippings or second-hand testimony passed down like heirlooms. A few claim to locate sites of interest, but nothing definitive has ever emerged. The desert has kept its secret. Could the bodies have been buried in a now-eroded arroyo, concealed in a forgotten cave? Or were they perhaps never buried at all, but scattered by time and nature, indistinguishable from the millions of stones beneath the New Mexico sky? Some theorists go further still. They point to missing pages in Fountain's case files, alleging deliberate sabotage of the investigation. They wonder if those pages held names too powerful to prosecute, if there were backroom deals made, whispers in the dark that ensured nothing would ever be found. Even in the early 20th century, occasional letters would surface written in anonymous hands offering clues, confessions or cryptic messages. Most were dismissed as hoaxes, some were quietly filed away, so the trail remains cold. Today, near the spot where the wagon was discovered, a historical marker tells a truncated version of the story. Tourists pass by, unaware that just beyond the dust lies one of the Southwest's most enduring, unsolved disappearances. The land itself seems indifferent, unchanged by the decades, still vast, still empty, still silent, and yet the question lingers. What became of Albert and Henry Fountain? What shadow passed through the desert that February night, never to be seen again? The sands have buried the evidence, but the mystery endures. the windswept messes of Lincoln County, New Mexico stretch far beneath the endless desert sky. Rugged open country broken only by the jagged silhouettes of ancient rock formations and the skeletons of old adobe buildings. Dust rises and dances along forgotten trails where riders once passed, and beneath it all lie traces of a turbulent past. This was the hunting ground of Billy the Kid, a name etched into the mythology of the American West like a scar, a gunslinger, an outlaw, a folk hero. But beneath the well-worn legend lies a lesser-known mystery, one not about how Billy died, but about what he may have left behind. For over a century, whispers have circulated of a fortune, money, gold, perhaps even Spanish treasure hidden by or associated with the kid, a stash concealed in haste, buried before a shootout, or entrusted to a confidant who took the secret to his grave. Could it be true? Could one of the most infamous figures in Western history have hidden something we've yet to find? Billy the Kid, born Henry McCarty, later going by William H. Bonney, was no stranger to conflict or betrayal. In the bloody Lincoln County War of the late 1870s, he aligned with a faction of young gunmen known as the Regulators, locked in a vicious feud with powerful merchants and politicians. In the chaos of that time, money changed hands quickly, some earned, some stolen, much of it undocumented, and in those lawless years hiding valuables became more than a precaution. It was survival. We know that Billy and his companions rustled cattle, intercepted payrolls and collected bounties, legal and otherwise, but official records of his take are murky. No clear accounting exists. He moved often, stayed light, and trusted few. Was it possible that amid the bloodshed and shifting allegiances, he managed to hide something for himself? Some researchers point to an account from 1878, when the Regulators allegedly intercepted a wagon rumoured to be carrying gold coins intended for corrupt officials. While the incident was never fully verified, one version of the tale suggests that the treasure disappeared afterward, vanished into the canyons near White Oaks, or hidden deep in the Capitan Mountains. The kid was said to have disappeared for days, returning without explanation. Did he stash something away? Another clue comes from a lesser-known associate of Billy's, Tom Pollard, one of the few men the kid is known to have trusted implicitly. O'Fallard was killed in 1880 by Pat Garrett's Posey, but before that, he reportedly spoke of a cache the two had hidden where the sun sets behind the Twin Hills. The phrase appears in multiple retellings, but the location remains elusive. Twin Hills could mean 100 different places in the high desert. There's also the matter of the kid's constant proximity to hidden wealth. In the 1880s, New Mexico was still rumoured to be crisscrossed with trails used by Spanish expeditions centuries earlier. Lost mines, abandoned missions and hidden vaults were part of the oral history. Some believe Billy stumbled upon one of these legendary troves, perhaps guided by local knowledge or sheer chance. While no firm evidence exists to support this theory, the timing and terrain certainly invite speculation. After his notorious escape from the Lincoln County Courthouse in 1881, killing 2 deputies in the process, Billy vanished once more into the wilderness. What did he take with him that day? A Winchester rifle, a stolen horse. But was there more? His final days remain as contested as his early ones. Pat Garrett claimed to have shot him dead in Fort Sumner in July of 1881, but some believe the kid escaped yet again, that Garrett staged the death or killed the wrong man. If Billy lived on under another name, as some argue, might he have returned for what he hid? Interestingly, stories of buried treasure in the region persisted long after the kid's supposed death. In the 1920s, a rancher claimed to discover a rotting canvas sack filled with old Spanish coins near an auto outside Lincoln. He said the bag contained a crude etching of the letters B and K. Another tale from the 1940s tells of a prospector who unearthed a rusted revolver and a small cache of silver dollars in a cave beneath the foothills. Was it just frontier loot or something more? Skeptics, of course, point to the lack of concrete evidence. Billy lived fast and died young. He was always on the move, always just one step ahead of the law. Would he have had time or the inclination to hide a fortune? Perhaps, perhaps not. But if he did, it wouldn't have been a grand vault or an elaborate treasure map. It would have been something small, concealed, meant to be retrieved quickly and alone. And what of the maps? In dusty attics and family chests, old sketches have surfaced, hand-drawn with cryptic symbols, often marked only by X or a half-remembered phrase like, under the stone that points north. Almost all are regarded as fakes or folklore, yet they persist, passing from one hand to another like relics of belief itself. Today, the town of Lincoln remains quiet, preserved in many ways as it stood in Billy's time. Tourists walk the same paths he once did, peer into the same cells he escaped from. But out there, beyond the town, beyond the reach of history's firm grip, the land still holds its secrets. Could something be hidden in the dry riverbeds? Beneath the juniper and dust of the Piaz Valley, a small fortune that was once the lifeline of a young outlaw trying to outwit a world closing in. It's possible, perhaps even probable. In a land where lives ended quickly and fortunes passed like smoke, the idea that Billy the Kid left something behind is more than a legend. It's a question that continues to pull people westward. Was it lost, forgotten, or is someone still holding the map? The silence of the desert doesn't answer, but if you listen long enough, it almost seems to ask, what else did the kid take to his grave or leave behind, waiting to be found? In the golden hush of Oregon's high desert, where juniper trees cling to rocky soil and sagebrush rolls like an ocean across the plains, the sun casts long, silent shadows across a vast and seemingly untouched land. The air is dry, the wind is sharp, and somewhere in this unforgiving wilderness, if legend is to be believed, lies a fortune, hidden, forgotten, or perhaps never truly found. It is a mystery that begins with a child's hand, a simple bucket, and an accidental discovery that may have altered the course of history if only it had been recognised for what it was. The story of the Lost Blue Bucket Mine begins in 1845 during a time of relentless westward migration. Dozens of families bound for the Willamette Valley followed what would come to be known as the Meek Cutoff, a treacherous alternative to the Oregon Trail, promoted by a mountain man named Stephen Meek. Seeking a shorter route through the Cascade Mountains, Meek led the wagon train south of the Columbia River across the arid, uncharted stretches of eastern Oregon. The journey soon turned perilous. The route was harsher than expected, water sources were few, and confusion about direction grew. As the immigrants spread out in search of help and supplies, a small group of children was sent to fetch water from a nearby creek. They returned with more than just water. They carried a few dull yellow rocks in a blue enamel bucket. To the weary settlers, these rocks were a curiosity at best. Some say they were mistaken for copper or iron pyrite. Others simply tossed them aside. But later, after reaching their destination and retelling the incident, someone with keener eyes suggested that the rocks had been gold. By then, of course, it was too late. The exact location of the stream had already been lost. There was no map, no coordinates, just a story passed from one immigrant to another. Children, a creek, a blue bucket, and yellow rocks. And so, the legend was born. What makes the tale so compelling is not just the presence of gold, but the timing. This occurred 4 years before the discovery at Sutter's Mill in California ignited the 1849 gold rush. Had the find in Oregon been recognised, it might have triggered an entirely different gold rush, shifting the flow of history northward. Oregon, not California, might have become the centre of a gold-fuelled migration. Over the years, dozens of prospectors tried to retrace the route taken by Meek's wagon train. Most started in the general region between the Malheur and John Day rivers, broad, remote and difficult terrain to search, even with modern tools. Some followed journals and diaries left by immigrants. Others relied on oral histories passed down through families who claimed their ancestors had been there. A few, it said, found traces of gold, but never enough to confirm they had found the original site. Could the location have eroded away? Could it have been a seasonal creek that vanished over time? Or might the immigrants have misremembered their path altogether? As with many Western legends, a scarcity of hard facts has only deepened the mystery. Over time, theories diverged, some rooted in geography, others in speculation. One theory places the Blue Bucket site near the Crooked River, where volcanic rock formations suggest ancient mineral deposits. Another suggests it lies closer to Canyon Creek, where later strikes in the 1860s hinted at the possibility of earlier undocumented gold sources. Yet another points to the Daschwitz River watershed, an area that remains rugged, little developed, and notoriously hard to search. And then there are the more speculative interpretations. Some fringe theorists suggest the story of the Blue Bucket Mine is not just about misplaced gold, but suppressed history. They point to the notion that settlers may have intentionally hidden the site to protect it from outside claimants, or that early prospectors were quietly silenced or bought off by more powerful mining interests in California. There's even a theory that connects the Blue Bucket legend to older native American stories of sacred Yellowstones found in the high desert, a connection that is more poetic than provable, but one that hints at the possibility that the land held treasures long before the settlers arrived. Yet, for all its retellings, the story never seems to grow less compelling. In every version, the image of the Blue Bucket remains almost absurdly simple. It is not a chest or a vault or a mine. It is a child's pail filled with stones of immeasurable value, left behind on a dusty trail somewhere between thirst and fear. And that may be what keeps the legend alive. Unlike other gold rush tales, the Blue Bucket Mine is a story of what might have been, of opportunity glimpsed and then lost, of fortune brushed by accident, then forgotten in the scramble to survive. Even today, amateur treasure hunters continue to scour Oregon's wild interior, guided by little more than hunches and century-old recollections. They walk the dry creek beds, pick through gravel bars, and stare at old maps, hoping to line up an unmarked trail with a known spring, a bend in the hills, or a campsite that matches a diary entry. Each expedition ends the same way, in uncertainty. Was the gold real, or was it iron pyrite glittering with false promise? Was the site lost, or was it never truly found in the first place? As the sun dips behind the Oregon horizon and the desert cools, the land falls silent again. Somewhere out there, perhaps beneath layers of dust and pine needles, the secret of the Blue Bucket Mine may still lie in wait, untouched since the hands of children first uncovered it in a forgotten summer so long ago. And one has to wonder if it's out there. Who will find it? Or has the land decided to keep its secret just a little while longer? As we leave behind the gold-laced whispers of Oregon's high desert, the landscape changes once again, growing hotter, emptier, and stranger. Now we drift south into a realm defined by silence and shimmer. The Mojave Desert stretches before us like an endless sea of sand, salt flats and ancient rock. The air trembles with heat, the horizon dances in mirage, and time itself seems to move differently here. Scorched plains give way to jagged mountains, and narrow trails once carved by stagecoaches wind through ghost towns long abandoned to the elements. But amid the desolation, a different kind of legend rolls through the dust. A story that doesn't belong to gold, gunfights, or lost diggings, but to the Iron Age of steam, and something that may have never stopped moving. This is the legend of the Phantom Train of the Mojave. The earliest reports came during the late 1800s, when the Southern Pacific and Santa Fe railroads carved steel veins through California's desert frontier. Railroad workers, many of them seasoned veterans of track-laying crews, began to whisper about something they could not quite explain. They spoke of a train seen at night, usually between Needles and Barstow, moving silently across the desert, its headlamp glowing dimly in the dark, smoke curling from its stack but producing no sound, no rumble, no whistle. Those who claimed to have seen it said it moved as if on rails that no longer existed, or perhaps had never been laid at all. The details vary. In some versions, the ghost train appears only under the light of a full moon, its silhouette gleaming silver against the distant cliffs. In others, it vanishes before the eyes of those who try to follow it, seeming to dissolve into the heat haze. A few witnesses have described hearing a faint rhythmic chuffing sound like a steam engine's breath, but with no echo, no tremble in the earth, and no source. One of the most persistent claims comes from 1904, when a group of railway inspectors near Kelso Station reported seeing a train that passed by without stopping, but was not on the manifest. When they tried to radio ahead, there was no record, no report, and no trace of it reaching the next station. Could it have been a mirage? A trick of the eyes under stress and heat? That's the explanation many have leaned on. The Mojave is infamous for its optical illusions. The intense heat rising off the desert floor can refract light in ways that cause distant objects to appear distorted or even doubled. A real train miles away could theoretically seem much closer or appear in the wrong direction, but this doesn't explain the cases in which the train has been seen or felt by individuals standing directly beside the tracks who describe a sensation of movement and wind despite no train ever passing. Skeptics suggest these sightings may be born from stress, sleep deprivation, or desert isolation. Railroad work was grueling, dangerous, and often monotonous. Combine that with the otherworldly emptiness of the Mojave, and hallucinations become plausible. Still, others point to more obscure explanations. One theory claims the phantom train is a temporal echo, some kind of replay from the past, that what people are seeing is a residual image from a real train that once passed through the area, its imprint somehow lingering in the environment. This idea, while speculative, is rooted in the broader folklore of stone tape theory, the belief that traumatic or powerful events can be recorded by the physical surroundings and replayed under certain conditions. But why a train? And why here? Some link the sightings to a particular tragedy. In 1883, a freight train carrying workers and materials derailed just outside of Daggett, California, killing several men and scattering twisted iron across the desert floor. Though the wreck was cleaned up, stories emerged soon after of a spectral locomotive appearing near the site of the crash, its whistle faint, its pace mournful. Survivors of the wreck refused to speak about the incident in later years, and locals began to say the desert had claimed something it wasn't ready to release. Another theory veers further into the realm of the mysterious. The idea that the phantom train is, not from the past, but from somewhere else entirely, a dimensional traveller or a vessel out of time, perhaps a relic from a world that exists parallel to our own. Some paranormal researchers note that deserts with their ancient geology and extreme conditions are often home to what they call thin places, areas where the veil between realities may weaken. Could the Mojave be such a place? We may never know. To this day, reports of strange trains persist. Hikers, desert travellers, and the occasional night driver along lonely stretches of Interstate 15 still report glimpses of a silent locomotive moving in the distance, glowing faintly in the darkness, trailing smoke that vanishes into the wind. Search as they might, they find no tracks, no wreckage, no explanation. Railroad companies long ago dismissed these stories as folklore, but among some train enthusiasts and desert historians, the legend still carries weight. What compels people to believe in something so fleeting, so elusive? Is it nostalgia for an era when the railroads carved civilization into wilderness? Or is it something deeper, a recognition that not everything leaves behind a clear trail? The Mojave is a place of extremes, heat and cold, isolation and endurance, silence and wind. It holds its secrets tightly, buried beneath sand and shadow. In such a place, is it so hard to believe that echoes linger and sometimes return? And so the question remains, is the phantom train merely a mirage of memory and myth? Or does something still roll silently across the sands, unseen, unexplained, and waiting to be discovered? The sun sets slowly over the red cliffs and narrow canyons of southern Utah, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the arid land. Here, in a landscape carved by wind, water, and time, secrets lie buried beneath centuries of stone. Jagged mesas rise like forgotten fortresses from the desert floor, their silhouettes burning gold and crimson in the evening light. It is a land that seems to whisper, a place where ancient legends and colonial ambitions collide. This is the heart of Montezuma Canyon. Remote, silent, mysterious. And somewhere, if the stories are to be believed, hidden deep within this rugged terrain is a treasure beyond imagining. Gold, jewels, artifacts of a fallen empire. But more than that, there is a curse, a vengeance, a legacy of blood. This is the legend of the lost treasure of Montezuma's revenge. The tale begins long before American settlers ever crossed these lands. It reaches back to the days of the Spanish conquest, to a time when Hernán Cortés marched into the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1519 and came face to face with an empire of unimaginable wealth. According to accounts from that era, the Aztec Emperor Montezuma II offered lavish gifts to the Spaniards, perhaps as tribute, perhaps as a peace offering. But it was not enough to quench the conquistadors' hunger for gold. In 1520, Montezuma died under uncertain circumstances, possibly at the hands of his own people, possibly murdered by the Spanish. In the chaos that followed, the legend says that a portion of the empire's treasure vanished. Some say it was hidden by the fleeing Aztecs. Others claim that loyalists to Montezuma took it and escaped north, far beyond the reach of Cortés and his men. Could that treasure have made its way into what is now the American Southwest? It's a theory that has lingered for centuries. Spanish colonial records mention expeditions into the northern deserts in search of lost cities and sacred mines. One of the most infamous was led by the conquistador Francisco Vázquez de Coronado in 1540. Driven by stories of the 7 cities of gold, he found no such cities, but he may have stirred old memories or old fears. Fast forward to the 1800s as American settlers and explorers began pushing into Utah, Arizona and New Mexico. It was during this period that rumours began to coalesce into a more specific legend that somewhere in Montezuma Canyon lies a cave sealed and hidden, where Aztec priests or warriors stashed a treasure too sacred to fall into foreign hands. According to one version of the story, Spanish soldiers pursued the fleeing Aztecs into the canyon and were subsequently ambushed and killed. Their bones, some say, still litter the valley floor. Others tell of a burial chamber deep within the cliffs, guarded by carved stone sentinels and ancient traps meant to kill anyone who dared to desecrate the site. A few even claim to have seen the treasure with their own eyes. Golden idols, ceremonial masks and tablets etched in glyphs no settler could read. And then there's the curse. As the legend goes, those who search for Montezuma's treasure meet with misfortune, accidents, illness, mysterious disappearances. Some have called it coincidence, others divine punishment. A few whisper that the curse is not superstition, but something older, an ancient protection placed over sacred ground never meant to be disturbed. One of the most well-known modern accounts came from the early 20th century. In 1914, a man named Freddie Crystal, an adventurer and prospector, claimed he had found Aztec maps etched into rock near Canaan, Utah. These petroglyphs, he said, pointed to Montezuma's treasure hidden in a nearby cave system. Crystal spent years searching the region, often returning empty-handed, though not without local support. His expeditions drew attention, and soon others joined the quest. But like those before him, he never found definitive proof. The skeptics have their own explanations. Many archaeologists argue that the Aztecs never travelled so far north, that the logistics, the terrain, and the lack of cultural artefacts along the way make such a journey unlikely. They suggest the story is a fusion of several myths: Spanish lust for gold, native resistance, and the timeless appeal of hidden treasure. There's also the possibility that the entire legend is a form of historical projection. In times of cultural upheaval, stories about buried wealth and sacred retribution tend to flourish. They offer both hope and warning, a promise of fortune, but at great risk. And yet, the landscape itself refuses to let the story die. Hikers in Montezuma Canyon report strange markings etched into cliff faces, stone carvings that appear too deliberate to be natural. In the 1980s, a team of amateur explorers claimed to have found sealed caverns behind a rockfall, but without proper permits or equipment, they were unable to explore further. Later attempts failed to relocate the site. Could the treasure still be hidden, sealed away beneath layers of sandstone? Or could the real treasure be something else entirely? Ancient knowledge, sacred symbols, a record of a people who vanished without a trace. The desert doesn't answer. It only preserves, watching, waiting. In a world driven by satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, it seems strange that such a massive cache could still lie undiscovered. But perhaps that is part of the story's enduring power. Not just the possibility of gold, but the reminder that some things, some truths, remain beyond our grasp. So, we're left to wonder, was Montezuma's revenge merely a myth told around campfires to ward off treasure hunters? Or is it something far older, far deeper, still buried in the canyons of the Southwest, waiting for the right eyes to see and the right hands to disturb what was never meant to be found as legends fade into the desert wind, leaving behind only traces of what might have been? The American Southwest offers no shortage of new enigmas to take their place. After all, this land is not only shaped by the rise and fall of empires, but also by sightings, whispers, and tales too strange to explain, yet too persistent to dismiss. Further west, beyond the hidden canyons and ancient ruins, lies the desolate expanse of southeastern Arizona, a place of wide horizons and silence, where the wind cuts through brittle brush and dry grasses whisper secrets to no one in particular. It was here in this lonely terrain that the legend of the Red Ghost began, not in myth, but in blood. The story takes us back to 1883 to a remote homestead near Eagle Creek, where a rancher left his wife and 2 children at home while he rode out with a hired man to check on their cattle. It was the sort of errand that was ordinary for the time, routine, uneventful. But what they returned to was anything but. The door to the cabin had been torn from its hinges. Inside, the woman's lifeless body lay trampled into the floorboards. The children, terrified but unharmed, could offer no clear explanation, only screams about a giant beast that had come from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. There were no human tracks, only enormous cloven hoof prints, unlike anything local ranchers had seen before. Word spread quickly across the territory. Cowboys, miners and settlers alike began swapping stories. Some said it was a demon. Others thought it might be a ghost from native legend. But soon more reports began to trickle in, each stranger than the last. Travellers claimed to see a towering red-haired creature roaming the desert. Not just an animal, but something else. A beast taller than any known livestock, draped in matted fur, wild-eyed and strangely burdened. Some insisted they saw a human figure, possibly a corpse, strapped to its back. Others swore it was a devil's mount sent to punish the living. What was it? The descriptions were consistent and sightings continued for over a decade. One rancher claimed the creature ran through his camp, scattering horses and smashing a water barrel with a single kick. A prospector fired his rifle at it, and though he missed, he insisted it was not a hallucination, nor was it any known beast of the frontier. Eventually, the legend earned a name, the Red Ghost. Local newspapers, including the Arizona Silver Belt and Tombstone Epitaph, documented multiple sightings throughout the 1880s. Some accounts bordered on the absurd, a beast that disappeared into thin air or a ghostly figure riding the creature, clothed in robes like an Eastern mystic. Yet others seemed grounded in reality. Hoof prints verified by multiple witnesses, property damage that couldn't be easily explained, and a growing body of first-hand reports by seemingly credible men. But amid the speculation, a more earthly theory began to take root. Could the Red Ghost have been a camel? It sounds improbable until you look closer at the history. In the 1850s, the United States Army launched a little-known experiment known as the US Camel Corps. At the time, much of the American West was viewed as unsuitable for traditional horses and mules, particularly in the arid deserts of the Southwest. So, under Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, the Army imported camels from the Middle East, believing them ideal for transport across harsh terrain. The experiment began in 1856 with great optimism. Camels, they discovered, could withstand extreme conditions and carry enormous loads. But there were problems. The animals were stubborn and difficult to manage. Soldiers and handlers, unfamiliar with their behaviour, found them unruly and unnerving. More than once, camels spooked horses and disrupted supply lines. Then came the Civil War. With military priorities shifting, the Camel Corps fell apart. Some camels were sold off, others escaped or were simply turned loose into the wild. Could one of these animals have survived deep into the 1880s? The theory gained weight when in 1893, a rancher reportedly shot and killed a large reddish camel near Eagle Creek. Strapped to its back in a half-rotted harness were remnants of leather straps and what appeared to be human bones. Had someone once been tied to the creature, dead or alive, and left to wander the desert? If so, who and why? Some speculate it might have been a punishment. Perhaps a rogue soldier or outlaw lashed to the camel and left to die. Others believe it was an accidental tragedy. The rider lost or killed. The camel continued on alone and burdened. Still others believe the remains were planted, part of an elaborate hoax designed to stoke fear or mystery. But even with the camel theory, questions remain. Not all reports of the Red Ghost match the profile of a camel. Several accounts describe eyes glowing red in the dark or the sound of chains rattling as it passed. Some insist they saw the beast vanish without a trace, leaving no trail behind. Could imagination and fear have transformed a rare animal sighting into a legend of the supernatural? Or was there something else out there? Something no taxonomy can explain? Decades later, long after the Red Ghost was supposedly killed, sightings of strange, large creatures in the desert continued. The name has faded, but the lore lingers. Hunters speak in hushed tones about encountering tracks too large to identify. Campers recall hearing heavy shuffling footsteps in the night followed by silence. Then nothing. Even today, in the remote corners of the desert, there are places where radios cut out, where GPS signals waver, and where travellers speak of a sense of being watched by something they can't quite see. Was the red ghost merely a lost camel, doomed to haunt the desert until the weight it carried, both physical and symbolic, brought it to ruin? Or was it something older? Something the desert itself conjured to remind us that not all mysteries need to be solved? And if we listened closely to the wind that sweeps through Eagle Creek, would we still hear those hooves echoing in the dust? And while the red ghost may have wandered the sunburnt sands of the Mojave, burdened by something unknown and unseen farther north, another shadow lingers, buried not beneath dust, but beneath snow. And the weight it carries is not just the memory of death, but the whisper of something perhaps never claimed and never found. High in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where towering pines stand like sentinels and the winds speak in hushed tones through alpine passes, lies the desolate region once known to early pioneers as the Truckee Route. Today, it's a place of remarkable natural beauty, tranquil, scenic, and still. But beneath its pristine surface lies one of the darkest chapters in the history of American westward expansion. The year was 1846, the Donner Party. Nearly 90 men, women, and children set out for California, drawn westward by the promise of new beginnings. They had no reason to expect tragedy. They were well supplied, hopeful, and travelling with experienced guides. But a series of fateful decisions, including a disastrous shortcut through the Wasatch Mountains, delayed their journey by weeks. When early snow trapped them in the Sierra Nevada near what is now Donner Lake, they were unprepared. What followed was a harrowing ordeal of starvation, frostbite, desperation, and ultimately cannibalism. Only about half of the party survived. That part of the story is well known. It's been studied, dissected, dramatised. But there's another layer, less discussed, rarely explored. One that involves not just what was lost in the mountains, but what may have been hidden there. A tale whispered in frontier journals and passed along by early Californians. The tale of the Donner Treasure. According to scattered accounts, some members of the Donner Party, particularly those from wealthier families, did not travel west empty-handed. It is believed that at least one family carried with them a sizable cache of gold coins, savings, inheritance, perhaps even business capital, meant to seed a new life in the booming settlements of Mexican California. Survivors later mentioned that valuables were buried beneath snow-covered wagons or secreted away during the height of the ordeal. Some reports speak of a small chest, iron-bound, locked, and buried near a large boulder for safekeeping before the snow arrived in full. Others recall coins being hidden under floorboards in makeshift cabins that were later abandoned, and while most assumed that such stories were simply artifacts of trauma and confusion, later events would suggest otherwise. In 1879, a prospector named Charles Stanton claimed to have found a rusted lockbox beneath the soil north of Alder Creek, containing rotted cloth, buttons, and fragments of what may have once been leather straps. The box itself had been pried open long ago, but its contents, if any, were long gone. Then, in the 1890s, a group of scavengers, following rumours passed down by descendants of the Murphy family, one of the original Donner Party members, dug near the old Donner Lake encampment. They discovered a partial silver spoon with initials engraved on the handle, an heirloom known to have belonged to young Virginia Reed, a survivor. No treasure was found. But what was it doing there, far from the recorded location of her family's shelter? And in 1901, a local historian noted that a series of circular depressions could still be seen in certain parts of the meadow during late summer, possibly indicating areas that had been dug out and later filled in again. Were they makeshift graves, storage pits, or something else? Perhaps most mysterious of all is the Journal of Edwin Bryant, a member of a separate wagon train that passed through the area weeks before the tragedy. In it, he notes that a man named SS, thought to be Samuel Shoemaker, spoke of having helped a member of the Donner Party hide valuables near a tall lightning-struck pine before the storm set in. That tree, if it ever existed, has long since vanished, but the rumour remains. Skeptics argue that any notion of buried treasure is a misreading of history, an attempt to romanticise an already grim tale. The Donner Party, they say, was focused entirely on survival. Gold and silver would have meant little in the face of starvation. Surely any hidden wealth would have been recovered by the survivors or claimed by rescue parties. But records show otherwise. During the 4 separate relief expeditions to retrieve the surviving members, many possessions were left behind. Supplies, journals, tools, even items of personal significance. Some survivors were too weak to retrieve their belongings, others never made it back at all. So the question remains, could something have been left behind? And if so, why has no trace of it ever been confirmed? One possibility is that the treasure, if it ever existed, was simply buried too well. The terrain has shifted with time, trees fallen, creeks diverted. What was once a clear landmark in 1846 may now be overgrown, unrecognisable. Artefacts could lie feet beneath the soil, undetected by modern searchers. Another theory is that someone did find it quietly, discreetly. There are whispers of a prospector in the early 20th century who arrived in Truckee suddenly wealthy, but would never explain where his fortune came from. His descendants deny the story, but the timing within a few miles of the Donner encampment remains curious. And finally, some suggest the treasure itself may never have been gold or silver at all, but something symbolic, a family heirloom, a document, a map, a secret, one that someone wanted to keep hidden and perhaps still does today. Hikers still tread the same trails. Snow still buries the meadows each winter, and the silence of the mountains remains unchanged, save for the creak of branches, the whisper of wind, and the occasional clink of metal against stone from treasure hunters who believe the past has yet to yield all its secrets. Could the truth still lie beneath the snow? Could something precious beyond even gold still be hidden in the shadows of what the Donner Party left behind? Or like so many legends of the West, has it already slipped beyond reach, lost in the cold silence of time? The desert lies vast and unyielding, a mosaic of sun-bleached rock, sagebrush and sand that stretches to the horizon in the American Southwest. Beyond the whispering dunes and dry washbeds lies a region shaped by wind and time, a land that refuses to surrender its secrets. It's here amid the arid flats and rocky outcrops near the Mojave and Colorado deserts that the legend of the lost Peggle mine endures, its name echoing through rattlesnake grass and weathered canyons. John Piggle Smith was not a myth. He was a mountain man, former fur trapper and adventurer turned prospector. His nickname was given after he lost part of his leg during some forgotten incident. In the 1820s and 1830s, he carved a path across the territories of New Mexico and California, navigating Spanish settlements and native trails with equal familiarity. Yet, one story stands apart. That in his final years he claimed to have found an enormous silver mine hidden in a rugged region of Southern California's deserts. A mine so rich it allowed him to live comfortably, but a location he never fully revealed. He spoke of it often. According to contemporaries, trappers, settlers, travellers who encountered Smith on the long roads, he carried a small pouch of raw silver ore, rough-cut nuggets shiny with promise. Smith said the ore came from a canyon in the desert where the walls glitter. But he died in 1866, never able or willing to share its exact coordinates. By then, the legend was born. Over the next 50 years, rumour ballooned into fervour. Treasure hunters flooded the Mojave, combing box canyons and alfalfa fields for glints of silver. Reporters for pioneer newspapers interviewed elderly trappers who swore Peggle knew something no one else did, but who had taken their maps and memories to the grave. Some claimed Smith left a trail of landmarks, an oddly bent juniper, a rock formation like a man's face, a waterhole beneath a limestone bluff. But the direction shifted with every telling. One of the most intriguing additions comes from the 1890s, when a man named Edward L. Pugh published an article in a California mining journal. He recounted meeting Smith near the Colorado River in 1864. Hearing a vivid description of the canyon, its walls sparkling with native silver deposits. But Pugh also noted that Smith never spoke of ore veins or workable veins, only raw silver scattered like fallen stars. It made prospecting difficult. If gold is hidden among rock without distinct structure, how do you find it? Skeptics argue that Smith was referring instead to surface float, silver-bearing rock moved by water or erosion detached from its source. If so, the actual mine's location might lie uphill where few have considered. Could it have been buried by rockfall after Smith visited? concealed, eroded, erased? Then there's the more speculative angle. Some speculate the mine rested in an undocumented vein older than Spanish or Mexican, prospecting in the region, possibly known only to native tribes who may have avoided its use. If so, Smith perhaps stumbled upon something deeply guarded, unrecognised as a working deposit by local indigenous peoples who didn't see it as material wealth. But others wonder if the silver was real at all, or merely the spark of an elderly man premising his own legend. Smith may have brought river-washed silver fragments to an old Western trader post and exaggerated their origin. Or perhaps he conflated memories of other men's finds into his own narrative, bending fact into folklore. Despite the debate, several discoveries over time keep the mystery alive. In 1939, a pair of amateur prospectors found coarse silver ore in a remote canyon north of present-day Humeria. They thought they'd struck the Los Pigel mine, but the rock contained trace amounts of lead, not pure silver, and the patch was too small to justify excavation. In 1955, another treasure hunter claimed he uncovered a cache of silver nuggets under a rock overhang near Barstow. But when tested, the metal turned out to be lead carnation silver-worn silver-plated ore. More recently, metal detecting groups have recorded isolated readings in box, canyons that roughly match old accounts, but no significant mineral deposits or worked shafts have ever been found. So we ask again, was Pagel Smith's claim a fluke, a chance find, too fleeting to follow, or did he indeed glimpse something real, only to lose its location to wind, time, and shifting sand? Another question arises. Why did the legend persist for so long? Possibly because desert prospecting by nature is treacherous and maddening, easy to dismiss real discoveries as fool's gold, and even easier to wish to override skepticism. Silver mines are not supposed to glitter from the desert floor, they lie deep and hidden. But when an old man's story sets the imagination aflame, the will to believe gains ground. We might also look at Smith's reputation. A frontier rack-on, a man shaped by adventure and hardship. His reliability is debatable, but his charisma is undeniable. Perhaps he understood that legends last longer than facts. And then there's the modern lens, Google Earth, satellite surveys, LiDAR that reveal hidden channels beneath the desert floor, box canyons mapped in pixels, contours unnoticed in the pre-digital era. Machines follow no myth, no fog of folklore, but still they've turned up nothing definitive. Does that suggest the mine never was? Or that it lies beneath a mappable bank of debris? Today, the desert lies silent. Its canyons offer shelter to coyotes, pack rats, and the occasional desert tortoise. Yet anyone pushing through high desert along forgotten ridges can't escape footsteps of the past. Narrow game trails now trod over by metal-hungry hunters, tracing Smith's lost steps, tracking a legend older than statehood. Could the Los Pegel mine still exist under a bed of collapsed rock sealed since the 1860s? Or might its real treasure lie not in silver, but in the question itself? Because in the end, the mine may not matter as much as the myth itself and why we keep chasing it. For where modern prospectors see data, measurements, mineral samples, old legends see possibility. And in the place where those worlds meet, mystery lingers, waiting to be rediscovered or accepted as forever hidden. In the American West, some mysteries drift across the sky like phantom lights, while others wear flesh and bone, walking a stranger path, not in the realm of folklore or natural anomaly, but in the murky boundary between life, death, and the long echo of both. As the desert dark recedes, we shift our focus from the inexplicable lights above Marfa to something far more tangible, yet no less haunting. This is a story not of what was seen in the sky, but what was found hanging in plain sight. A body forgotten, misplaced, and then rediscovered. And its tale would stretch over 6 decades, across state lines, through vaudeville halls, amusement parks, and finally to a television film set. It begins with a body in a Los Angeles funhouse. The year was 1976. A film crew was shooting an episode of the television series The $6 Million Man Inside a run-down amusement park attraction in Long Beach, California. While repositioning a prop, a mummified-looking figure dangling from a noose, someone bumped the figure. Its arm broke off. Inside, the limb were not wires or stuffing, but bone. Real bone. The prop, it turned out, wasn't a prop at all, it was a corpse. and this was the moment that brought the name Elmer McCurdy back into public consciousness for the first time in decades. But who was Elmer McCurdy? And how did his body come to hang lifeless in a carnival attraction thousands of miles and nearly 70 years from where he last drew breath? The story begins like so many from the Wild West in hardship. Elmer McCurdy was born in 1880 in Maine, a child marked by uncertainty from the start, raised by his mother's brother to avoid the shame of illegitimacy. He drifted through odd jobs from plumbing to mining, and eventually joined the army where he learned rudimentary skills in explosives. In 1911, he turned to crime. But McCurdy was not a successful outlaw. He attempted to rob a train in Oklahoma rumoured to be carrying thousands in silver. Instead, he blew open the wrong safe and netted just $46 and some liquor. Days later, he was tracked down and killed in a shootout with lawmen near the Kansas border. What happened next is where the story diverges from the ordinary. With no known relatives to claim the body, the undertaker at the local funeral home embalmed McCurdy using an arsenic-based preservative, common at the time for unclaimed corpses. But rather than bury him, the mortician propped McCurdy up in a corner and began charging people a nickel to view the bandit who wouldn't give up. Coins were dropped into his mouth. Years passed. Then, in a strange twist of fate, a travelling carnival claimed to be relatives and took possession of the body. From there, McCurdy's corpse began an odyssey exhibited at sideshows displayed in storefront windows, passed from one amusement enterprise to another. Each new handler seemed to forget a little more of who or what he really was. By the 1930s, he had become just another mummy, a curiosity, silent and still stripped of identity. At one point, he was even displayed in the lobby of a movie theatre as part of a promotional gimmick for a horror film. By the 1960s, time and environment had transformed the body into something almost unrecognisable. Skin hardened like varnish, limbs stiffened by decades of exposure and poor care. He was coated in wax and paint to maintain a more theatrical appearance. And by 1976, he was hanging in a funhouse, mistaken for a papier-mâché decoration, until he quite literally fell apart. How could something like this happen? Forensic investigation confirmed the body was indeed human. Medical examiners found bullet wounds consistent with McCurdy's death and preserved dental features matching early photographs and records. Eventually, through archival research, the mummified remains were positively identified as Elmer McCurdy, making his case one of the most bizarre journeys in American history. But some questions still linger. Why was his body never properly buried? Did the undertaker knowingly allow it to become a roadside attraction, or did he simply lose control of its fate? Were all the subsequent owners truly unaware, or did they treat the body with willful ignorance for the sake of profit? And even more curiously, were there others like him? At the height of travelling carnivals and dime museums in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was not uncommon for mummified remains, both real and artificial, to be put on display. Some were indigenous bodies taken from burial sites. Others were unclaimed corpses sold or rented to performers. The line between spectacle and ethics was often blurred. In that world, could McCurdy's story be less unique than we imagine? What does his journey say about how we treat the dead and how easily a human life can be turned into an object? After the discovery in 1976, Elmer McCurdy was finally laid to rest in Guthrie, Oklahoma. Authorities poured concrete over the casket to prevent any further attempts to exhume or exploit the remains. But the legend had already taken root, and in its retelling, McCurdy's story has become more than an anecdote. It's a reflection on the odd intersection of history, exploitation, and forgotten identity. His body, once a man, then a myth, then an artifact, forces us to confront how truth can be reshaped by time, and how memory can be lost beneath the dust of spectacle. Was McCurdy just an unlucky outlaw who met a dramatic, unfortunate postscript? Or was he part of something stranger? A cautionary tale, or even a symbol of how easily the past can become unmedicated? Perhaps in the end, the question isn't just about Elmer McCurdy. It's about what else might be hiding in plain sight, forgotten behind curtains, mistaken for something false, when all along it was real. As the desert sands of Southern California settle behind us, the mystery of Peggle Smith fading into the dust, we cross eastward beyond the Pos, past forgotten mining towns and scattered windmills into the wide open silence of West Texas. Here the land stretches out like a canvas of subtle tones. Burnt umber and ochre at midday, deep violet and blue. As dusk descends, the air grows thinner, cooler, and the sky broader. And beyond the small town of Marfa, beneath the Chinati Mountains, the mystery begins. It starts with lights faint, flickering, and always without warning. They appear along the Mitchell Flat, a vast stretch of scrub and grassland just east of town. Out there, past the highway, where the road bends toward Alpine, strange globes of light have been seen, floating, dancing, dividing and recombining. Some drift slowly like lanterns held by invisible hands. Others dart and vanish only to reappear seconds later in a place they shouldn't be. White, red, blue. Colours shift without pattern, and no one can say why. The first recorded mention came in 1883. A young cowboy named Robert Reed Ellison was driving cattle near Pisano Pass when he saw what he described as a flickering light, like a campfire. But no fire was there come morning. He wasn't the only one. Early settlers in the area soon traded stories, lights that followed writers that disappeared as they approached or danced beyond reach in the dark. Apache tribes before them had spoken of phantom fires and sacred stories passed down through generations. But it wasn't until the 20th century that the phenomenon became more widely known. By the 1940s, sightings had increased. World War II pilots training nearby reported mysterious lights in the desert, lights that seemed to respond to their aircraft, sometimes moving erratically or even vanishing when chased. Locals dubbed them simply the Marfa lights. Tourists, journalists, even scientists began to take notice. Still, the lights came and went, elusive and unpredictable. In 1957, Life magazine published a photo essay on mysterious occurrences across the American frontier. The Marfa lights featured prominently, captivating the public imagination, and over the decades the mystery deepened. So, what are they? Mainstream explanations offer several possibilities. Some scientists suggest they are a rare atmospheric phenomenon, perhaps a type of mirage known as fat morana, where temperature inversions in the air bend light and make distant objects appear to float. Could headlights from a far-off highway be refracted in just the right conditions? It's plausible. A 2004 study conducted by a university team used car headlights and temperature monitoring to test this theory. In some instances, the experimenters could recreate light effects that closely resembled the Mara lights, but not all sightings fit the mould. Witnesses report lights that hover well above the ground that split in two or change direction sharply. Others insist the lights appear even when no cars are travelling in the area. Some say they've seen the lights for hours, changing colour, moving rhythmically, behaving unlike any mirage or man-made source. Then there are the more speculative theories. Some believe the lights are tied to seismic activity, what's known as earthquake lights. These rare luminous phenomena are thought to result from tectonic stress, where quartz-bearing rocks generate electrical fields. But West Texas isn't known for regular seismic unrest, raising more questions than answers. Others look even further afield. Could the lights be plasma or ball lightning? Unexplained atmospheric charges or something more arcane? Residual energy, perhaps from a violent or unsettled past? Some point to old frontier clashes, to massacres and lost camps, as if the land itself holds memory in its air. Still others turn to the paranormal. Legends tell of ghostly riders who wander the flatlands, eternally seeking a trail lost to time. Could the lights be their lanterns, signals in the dark, messages from another plane? Or might they be echoes of an ancient culture long buried beneath the soil? Spiritual markers whose meaning has been lost to centuries. Skeptics urge caution. They point to confirmation bias, to human error, to the power of suggestion. You see what you expect to see, they argue. Lights in the dark are easily misread, but that doesn't explain the reports from pilots in clear airspace, or why multiple witnesses from different locations describe the same phenomena on the same night. Today, an official viewing area stands just east of Marfa along Highway 90. On any given evening, people gather with cameras, notebooks, and hope. Some leave with a story, others with only stars, and perhaps that's what gives the mystery its weight. Not its frequency, but its consistency. For over a century, through war, progress, and technological advancement, the Mara lights have remained undefined. So, we're left to wonder, are the lights a quirk of nature, a scientific riddle we've not yet solved? Are they an optical echo of history, a ghost of something we no longer recognise? Or are they something else entirely, something that challenges our sense of what is possible? In the stillness of the Texas night, when the wind falls silent and the sky becomes an endless ocean, the lights return, uninvited, unexplained, unforgettable. And so the question remains, what do the lights of Marfa reveal, and what do they keep hidden? If Elmer Messert's fate blurred the lines between death and performance, between man and myth, the story that follows treads even deeper into the fog of fame, betrayal, and unresolved truth. For in the dusty heart of Deadwood, South Dakota, one of the Old West's most iconic figures met a sudden and violent end. But whether justice was truly served remains to this day a question cloaked in silence. It was August 2nd, 1876. The town of Deadwood was barely more than a mining camp at the time, a rough outpost carved into the Black Hills. Its streets are muddy with rain and ambition, filled with fortune seekers, gamblers, gunslingers, and opportunists. Gold fever coursed through the saloons and tents. Law and order had not yet taken root, and inside the dim, smoke-filled walls of Natalin Mann's No. 10 saloon, a man sat at a card table with his back to the door. He wore his long hair tucked behind his ears, his eyes hidden behind a wide-brimmed hat. In his hands, cards in his pocket perhaps, a few coins and a watch. It was by all accounts a quiet afternoon until it wasn't. Wild Bill Hickok, frontier scout, Union soldier, lawman, and one of the fastest guns in the West, was shot in the back of the head at point-blank range while holding 2 pairs, aces, and 8s. What would become known as the dead man's hand, his killer, a drifter and petty gambler named Jack McCall. McCall was caught quickly. He tried to flee, but the townspeople apprehended him before he got far. He claimed the murder was revenge for the killing of his brother, though no record of such a relative ever surfaced. In Deadwood's improvised court, McCall was acquitted, but that wasn't the end. Deadwood, it turned out, had no legal authority. The town wasn't officially part of any US territory at the time, and when McCall bragged about his act in Wyoming days later, federal authorities stepped in. He was retreaded, found guilty, and hanged in 1877. Justice, it would seem, had been done. But the story doesn't end with a gunshot or a rope. In fact, some would argue it begins there, because questions linger about that afternoon in Deadwood. Questions not just about the motive, but the method, the witnesses, and the curious decisions leading up to Hickok's death. To understand what might have happened, we need to step into the boots of the man himself. Wild Bill Hickok was a legend even in his own time. He claimed to have killed dozens of men in shootouts, though historians debate the real number. His reputation was built as much by dime novels as by deeds. A former lawman in Kansas, he had been drifting in the months before his death, troubled, some said, by failing eyesight and a growing unease with the myth he had become. Hickok had a rule. He never sat with his back to the door. He was known to rearrange entire rooms to ensure he could see anyone approaching. So why that day in Deadwood did he break the rule? Some accounts say the only seat left at the table was the one with its back exposed. Others suggest he simply let his guard down. But those who knew him insist he would never have taken that seat unless something or someone forced him to. Was he pressured to play, intimidated, or had he been deliberately manoeuvred? Then there's the matter of Jack McCall. Descriptions of McCall vary. Some depict him as a down-on-his-luck gambler, others as an erratic drunk. But many agree he was not the type of man to take down Wild Bill Hickok on his own, which raises the question, was he acting alone? Rumours swirled in the weeks after the murder. Some said McCall had been paid to kill Hickok, possibly by other gamblers or mining speculators in Deadwood, who saw Hickok as a threat to their dominance. Others pointed to political motives linking Hickok's presence to federal interests in the lawless Black Hills region. There was even talk, though never substantiated, of Confederate holdovers who still resented Hickok's Union loyalties and wartime activities. Could revenge have been delayed, disguised, and executed in the chaos of a boomtown? Another oddity. After the murder, McCall's possessions were searched. He had a considerable sum of money on him, far more than someone of his reputation would normally carry. Where did it come from? None of it was ever definitively answered, and by the time McCall met the hangman's noose in Yankton, he had offered no further explanation. Then there are the conspiracy theories, some fanciful, others grounded in frontier logic, that Hickok faked his own death to escape the burden of fame, that the man buried in Deadwood wasn't Hickok at all, or that McCall was part of a secret plot that went far beyond personal vendetta. an enforcer of a larger force trying to reshape power in a territory without laws. These theories have never been proven, but neither have they been entirely dismissed. What is known is this: Wild Bill Hickok died with cards in his hand, facing away from the door in a saloon filled with smoke and strangers. And while his killer was punished, the full story of why and how remains clouded by time. Was it a simple murder, a cowardly shot from a man outmatched and angry? Or was it something more orchestrated? A hit planned in the shadows of greed, politics, or fear? We may never know. The records are incomplete. The testimonies are unreliable. Deadwood has long since traded its mud streets for asphalt, its chaos for calm. But the saloon is still remembered. The cards still evoke unease, and the name Wild Bill still carries the scent of gunpowder and unfinished stories. So, we're left to wonder what really happened that day in Deadwood, and who or what was sitting across from Wild Bill Hickok in more ways than one. As the echoes of gunfire fade from the shaded saloons of Deadwood, we travel west beyond the dry gulches of New Mexico and across the sun-blasted deserts of Southern California. Here in the shadow of the San Miguel Mountains, another mystery stirs, not one of men and bullets, but of mountains and gold. Not a tale of sudden death, but of a vanishing fortune that may never have existed, or may still lie buried, waiting. In this parched and dramatic stretch of land, where chaparral clings to the ridgelines and the wind carries the scent of sage and dust, stories have long circulated about a secret mine, a place known only to a few and spoken of in whispers, the Lost Padre Mine. The legend begins like so many in the Old West in the time of transition, when the Spanish Empire ruled over California, and the missions were more than just places of worship. They were centres of control, labour, and resource extraction. Somewhere between the late 1700s and early 1800s, Franciscan friars, according to oral accounts, discovered a rich vein of gold deep within the hills south of present-day Bakersfield. But this wasn't a gold rush mine, chaotic and open to all. It was allegedly kept hidden by the Padres, worked in secret by indigenous labourers, and guarded with spiritual severity. Some say it was used not to enrich the church directly, but to fund a larger Spanish colonial agenda, part of an unofficial treasury used in times of unrest or crisis. If such a mine existed, where was it, and why did it vanish? Some versions of the story suggest that when Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, the priests abandoned the mine, fearing retribution or political instability. Others claim it was sealed deliberately by the Padres themselves, buried beneath rockfalls, or disguised by collapsing entrances. Its location encoded into sacred maps or oral traditions passed down through generations of local tribes. And then there's the more ominous version that the labourers were killed to ensure silence, and the mine left to the guardianship of ghosts. The first modern references to the lost mine came in the mid to late 19th century. Prospectors spoke of old smelting equipment found in remote canyons or carved steps leading nowhere through weathered stone. In 1837, a Mexican soldier named Esteban Munoz reportedly encountered an old padre on his deathbed, who confessed to the mine's existence and begged him to destroy it to prevent greed from taking root. Munoz is said to have followed the directions, discovered a sealed shaft and never spoken of it again. Is that just folklore? A frontier ghost story? Or is it possible that the mine truly existed and was successfully erased from the landscape? In the early 1900s, treasure hunters and amateur historians began combing the region. Among them was William Burrow Schmidt, a miner who spent decades tunneling through a nearby mountain, though not necessarily looking for the Padre mine itself. Others, like George Harron in the 1930s, swore they had found traces of the lost gold, crucifixes hammered into trees, Spanish coins buried in shallow earth, and crude inscriptions in the rock that appeared to point deeper into the hills. Still, no definitive mine was ever uncovered, and each new expedition seemed to lead only to more fragments, never to the source. Some say the mine was simply a fiction created by missionaries or their descendants to deter unwanted prospectors from sacred ground. Others believe it may have been real, but the gold was exhausted long before California's larger mining booms took shape. Then there are those who believe the mine still exists, untouched, concealed by time and silence, that it lies buried within the Los Padres National Forest beneath sandstone cliffs in Manzanita, waiting for the right person or the right moment to be revealed. A few even believe the land itself refuses to give it up. In the 1970s and 80s, stories emerged of explorers encountering strange sounds near rumoured mine entrances, low chants, sudden gusts of wind in windless canyons, the faint ringing of distant mission bells. One man claimed he saw a figure in a brown robe vanish behind a rock face. Another said his compass spun wildly when approaching a narrow ravine he believed held the shaft. Of course, skeptics argue that the mine was never more than a tale meant to romanticise a brutal past, that it served as a convenient legend, a symbol of loss and longing, but not of actual treasure. They point to the lack of hard evidence, the shifting geography, and the evolution of the story over time as reasons to doubt its existence entirely. But there's something about the lost Padre mine that refuses to fade. Why have so many searched for it, often risking their lives in the remote and unforgiving terrain of the California backcountry? What keeps this particular legend alive when so many others have been forgotten? Perhaps it's the fusion of faith and fortune, the idea that the sacred and the profane once intersected in a canyon now swallowed by silence. Or maybe it's the deeper truth behind so many Western mysteries that we're drawn to the things that cannot be proven because they offer something more enduring than gold: wonder. And so the trail continues. Maps are drawn, land is scanned, and hikers occasionally stumble across the remnants of a foundation, or the whisper of a path, and wonder quietly if they are close. Because even now in the 21st century, the question remains, is the Lost Padre mine merely a legend crafted in the twilight of empire? Or is it still out there, hidden beneath centuries of stone and sand, its secrets sealed by time and something else? In the lingering silence of the California wilderness, where whispers of vanished missionaries still drift across granite slopes, we now turn eastward, deeper into the sun-seared abyss of the American frontier. The terrain shifts abruptly here. The cool shadows of the forest give way to scorched rock, parched salt flats, and heat shimmering off endless miles of desolation. This is Death Valley, a place where the earth seems to crack and sigh under its own weight. It is one of the most extreme environments on the continent, where temperatures reach well above 120 degree F, and rainfall is so rare that life seems to hold its breath. Yet, for all its barrenness, Death Valley has long held secrets: geological, archaeological, and perhaps something more elusive. For nearly a century, stories have emerged from this arid void of something strange. Bones discovered in the most inaccessible places, human remains found miles from any water, any trail, any known historical path, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, and often with no clear explanation. They are known to some as the skeletons of Death Valley. What makes these findings so unnerving isn't just the isolation, it's the patterns, the consistent, almost ritualistic quality to their placement, the absence of identifiable belongings, and the difficulty in connecting them to any known expedition or migration. The earliest reports date back to the late 19th century, when prospectors first began cutting trails through the valley in search of gold and silver. In 1891, a small group claimed to have stumbled upon a cavern near Wingate Wash. Inside, according to their account, were multiple human skeletons, some lying flat, others propped against the rock as if resting. The space had no apparent entry but a narrow crawlway and no evidence of fire or habitation. Local authorities allegedly investigated but found nothing. The story might have ended there, dismissed as prospector myth, but similar tales continued to surface over the decades. In the 1920s, a group of desert explorers near Furnace Creek claimed to find two skeletons seated beneath a natural stone overhang. What stood out was the condition of the bones. No sign of animal scavenging, no fabric remnants, no tools, just the bones clean and undisturbed, as if deliberately placed. Were these the remains of early native peoples, explorers who perished far off course, or something less explainable? Throughout the 1930s and 40s, amateur archaeologists and treasure hunters, many inspired by tales of lost cities or Spanish mines, reported coming across isolated bones and shallow graves, some marked only by a single stone or a circle of pebbles. In one case near the Panamanian mountains, a series of skeletons was reportedly found in a line, spaced evenly apart, almost too deliberately staring out toward the valley floor. And then there's the story of the Death Valley Germans. In 1996, a German family of 4 went missing while hiking the valley. Their car was later found abandoned with supplies still inside. For years, no trace of them was found. Until 2009, when skeletal remains believed to be theirs were uncovered in the vast wilderness. In this case, there was an explanation: poor planning, dehydration, disorientation, but it reinforced the deadly silence of the place and how easy it is to vanish here. So, which skeletons belong to the lost and which are still unaccounted for? Some theories attempt to ground the phenomenon in history. It's known that various indigenous tribes, including the Timisha-Shoshone, lived on the edges of the valley. Burial customs could explain some of the findings, though the tribes themselves say they avoided the deeper parts of Death Valley, considering them sacred and sometimes cursed. Others suggest the skeletons may be remnants of undocumented miners or migrants, men who struck out in desperation, failed to return, and were consumed by the elements. Records from the Gold Rush era are incomplete at best, and entire groups are known to have disappeared en route to California during the mid-1800s. But even these theories struggle to explain the peculiar circumstances surrounding some remains, their placement, the absence of personal effects, and the remote locations in which they're found. That's where more speculative ideas creep in. Some believe there may be forgotten hideaways in the mountains, ancient mines, or stone shelters built by long-lost peoples. Echoes of this idea can be found in the legends of ghost cities said to exist beneath the desert floor, left behind by a civilization predating known history. In the 1930s, a man named Harry Gower claimed to have explored a cave system near the Panamints where he found mummified bodies, unusual tools and walls covered in symbols. No photographic evidence exists, and Gower's accounts are widely considered apocryphal. Still, the story has fueled decades of interest. Then there are tales of military involvement, stories of search efforts quietly halted, or sites quietly closed off. Could some of the skeletons be the result of classified testing, or covert operations gone awry? These theories remain, in the shadows, untested, unverified, and largely anecdotal. Yet they persist because the landscape permits it. Because Death Valley, with its silent stone and brutal sun, hides what it wants to hide. We know this. Remains have been found. Real skeletons documented, some with identities, others still anonymous. They are occasionally recovered by hikers or researchers. Sometimes the Park Service is notified. Often, though, they are left where they are, part of the landscape now. No headlines, no resolution. The Bureau of Land Management and National Park Service acknowledge the risk of death in these parts and discourage deep exploration without permits or guides. And while official maps don't mark any skeleton caves or death corridors, locals say there are places in the valley you don't enter, not because of superstition, but because something about them feels wrong. So what are we to make of the skeletons of Death Valley? Are they simply the bones of the unlucky wanderers lost to thirst, heat, and time? Or are they evidence of something else entirely? Something more ritualistic, more hidden, more intentional? As the sun sets over the craggy ridges and salt flats of Death Valley, one thing becomes clear. This place is not just empty, it is waiting. And what lies buried beneath its silence may be more than just sand and stone. It may be a story not yet ready to be told. From the sun-racked silence of Death Valley, a place where time seems to dissolve and the earth buries its secrets. We journey now into the Santa Catalina Mountains of southern Arizona. Here the air feels different, sharp with desert sage, still with expectation. Towering peaks rise above dry gulches and winding trails. At sunrise, the shadows stretch long across the boulder-strewn slopes. The wind whispers through mesquite and juniper. And somewhere in this vast and rugged terrain, legend holds, lies a hidden cave sealed by an iron door. This is the story of the Cave of the Iron Door, one of the Southwest's most enduring and elusive mysteries. According to local accounts, somewhere in these mountains rests an ancient mine, or perhaps a stronghold guarded not by time alone, but by a man-made barrier, a thick metal door bolted shut and sunken into stone. What lies behind it? No one knows for certain, but stories have persisted for more than a century of lost treasure, vanishing travellers, and a secret that resists discovery. The legend traces its roots back to the Spanish colonial era, when Jesuit missionaries and early Spanish explorers moved through the region in the 17th and 18th centuries. Historical documents confirm the presence of missions and mining operations, some sanctioned by the Crown, others quietly pursued for personal or clerical gain. Gold, silver and copper deposits were known to exist in the Santa Catalinas, and some believed that an especially rich vein was found, mined in secret, and then hidden as political winds shifted. When Spain expelled the Jesuits from its colonies in 1767, many of their missions were shuttered abruptly. Could they have left behind more than just crumbling adobe walls? Could this cave have been part of a concealed storehouse, one sealed against time and plunder? The idea gained traction in the early 20th century when a reclusive prospector named William Lone Wolf James claimed to have discovered the cave during his years wandering the canyons above Tucson. His descriptions were vivid and strange. A steel-plated door inset into the mountainside, surrounded by sheer rock with no apparent handle or mechanism. He claimed he had once managed to pry it open slightly, revealing a deep, dark passage descending into the earth, but he was unable or unwilling to enter. Lone Wolf's story spread. Treasure hunters flocked to the area, fanning out across the foothills and ravines, many hoping to locate the door and whatever riches it concealed. Some returned empty-handed, others didn't return at all. Skeptics argue that the cave never existed, that Lone Wolf's tale was an invention, an echo of older Spanish legends, or even a misremembered experience twisted by solitude and hardship. But believers point to the strange consistency of the story across unrelated sources. Hikers have occasionally reported oddities in the terrain, metallic echoes from beneath rock, heat rising from fissures even in winter, and narrow passageways abruptly ending in collapsed walls. One explorer in the 1930s claimed to have found iron hinges embedded in stone. He took photographs, now long lost, but swore the site existed, only to be later destroyed by landslides or sabotage. If the door is real, why has it remained hidden? Some suggest it's not a single cave, but part of a larger network connected perhaps to underground waterways, old mining tunnels, or natural chambers still unmapped. The Santa Catalina Mountains, after all, are riddled with caves, crevices, and faults. Others believe the cave may be protected by more than just geology. There are whispered accounts, mostly passed along in bars and among amateur explorers, of those who got close but were turned away. One man said he reached a site that matched Lone Wolf's description, only to hear voices whispering from within the stone. Another said he saw a light inside the mountain, pulsing faintly in the night before vanishing without trace. Then there are stories of maps, hand-drawn sketches with cryptic notations said to have been found in old mission records or hidden in antique books. Some of these purportedly describe landmarks still visible today: a split rock shaped like a horn, a dry riverbed curving like a scythe, and a cave with a single, black stone at its base. But each new lead seems to add another layer of confusion, not clarity. It's worth noting that some versions of the legend connect the Cave of the Iron Door with other southwestern mysteries, linking it to the fabled Jesuit treasure vaults said to have been hidden throughout the region before their expulsion. In this view, the cave is not unique, but one of several caches tied together by a network of secret routes and coded instructions, and yet no treasure has ever been confirmed. No iron door has been authenticated. The mountain keeps its silence. Geologists, for their part, acknowledge that iron-rich minerals are common in the region, and that stories of magnetic anomalies could easily be natural. But that doesn't explain the consistency of the cave's description, or the door itself. A detail too specific, too unusual to be easily dismissed. Could there be something behind the door? And if so, what? A lost trove of Spanish gold, hidden religious artifacts, a forgotten outpost abandoned in haste, preserved like a time capsule beneath stone, or perhaps nothing at all. Just a story weathered and reshaped by decades of retelling, standing as a mirror to our hunger for mystery. And still the mountain watches, its trails are steep, its signs faint. And those who walk them today, just as they did 100 years ago, sometimes pause at an unmarked cliff or a shaded crevice and wonder, was it here? Could the door be just out of sight, covered by a rock slide, concealed by erosion, protected by silence? Or has it already been found? Its secret is quietly taken and the entrance erased. We may never know, but the legend endures, not in books or museum archives, but in the wind that moves between the stones, in the glint of metal beneath dust, and in the pull of something just out of reach. As we leave behind the myth sealed behind an iron door in the Santa Catalina Mountains, we return to a place already marked by silence and disappearance, Death Valley. But unlike the vague, half-buried legends of colonial gold and mission secrets, this story is grounded in recent history. It is real, documented, and yet in many ways remains no less mysterious. It begins with a rented minivan. In July of 1996, a family of 4 German tourists, a father, a mother, and 2 sons, set out on what should have been a simple excursion into the California desert. They were well-travelled, educated, and seemingly cautious. Eggert Rimkus, 34, was a civil engineer. His partner, Cornelia Meyer, 27, was a trained teacher. Along with Eggert's 11-year-old son, Georg, and Cornelia's 4-year-old son, Max, they had flown from Dresden to visit the American Southwest, a landscape that had long captured the European imagination. On July 22nd, they checked into a Las Vegas hotel. 2 days later, they signed the rental paperwork for a green 1996 Plymouth Voyager. Their itinerary included stops in Death Valley National Park, specifically the scenic areas near Furnace Creek, Badwater Basin, and the rugged remote washes near Warm Springs Canyon. But after July 25th, they vanished. What followed became one of the most haunting search and rescue efforts in modern national park history. The first clue didn't come until months later. In October 1996, park rangers discovered the family's minivan, abandoned near the Anvil Canyon trailhead in a remote area of southern Death Valley. It was an unforgiving place, far off the paved roads, accessible only by rugged 4-wheel drive vehicles. The tyres were shredded, the van badly damaged from rough terrain. And yet inside, the keys were still in the ignition. Maps, guidebooks, a camera, and even untouched water bottles remained. The van had been driven far beyond the reach of ordinary tourists. So, how did they get there? And more urgently, where had they gone? Extensive searches were launched. Helicopters scanned the area. Ground teams worked in blistering heat, fanning out through canyons and dry washes. Native guides, experienced trackers, and law enforcement all scoured the region. No trace of the family was found. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single human bone. It was as if the desert had simply taken them. In the years that followed, theories proliferated. Some were straightforward that the family, likely disoriented and underestimating the brutal terrain, attempted to hike out of the canyon on foot after the van became disabled. The most plausible theory held that they tried to cross the rugged terrain toward the naval base at China Lake, mistakenly believing it was closer than it was, a fatal miscalculation. Others, however, were not so easily explained away. Why had they gone off-road in the first place, deep into the back country, with no apparent reason? Why had they not turned around once the road became impassable? And what of the message reportedly scrolled in the guest book at Warm Springs Mine, which read simply, "We are going over the pass"? Was it a sign of desperation or confidence? And then there's the unsettling idea that they may not have been alone. Some suggest they encountered someone, intentionally or not, who led them off course. Stories emerged of unregistered vehicles in the area around the same time, and a few local desert dwellers speculated about illicit activity in the backcountry. Drug runners, smugglers, or loners guarding old mining claims. But no credible evidence was ever found. For 13 years, the case remained unsolved. Then in 2009, a pair of hikers searching for evidence stumbled upon a partial skeleton in a remote area of the desert southeast of the van's last known location. Not far from it were additional remains, bones scattered over a wide area likely moved by animals or weather. Personal items were also found: a journal, a wallet, a camera case. DNA testing confirmed it. The remains belonged to Eggert Rimkus and Cornelia Meyer. The bones of the 2 children were never recovered. Even with this grim confirmation, the mystery lingers. Why were they found so far from the van over 10 mi in terrain that few would dare attempt, especially in midsummer heat, exceeding 115 degrees F? Why did they appear to have separated during their final journey? And why, in an age of detailed maps and growing satellite navigation, had their route taken them into such a desolate and inaccessible zone? Theories once again abound. Some suggest Rimkus may have been following a rumour, perhaps even one of the many enduring legends of lost gold in the desert. Could the family have taken a detour to explore a rumoured treasure site or a supposed shortcut known only to fringe treasure maps? It seems unlikely. Yet the line between careful exploration and overconfidence is often razor thin. Others wonder if there was more to their journey than sightseeing. Conspiracy theories, though without evidence, hint at espionage, secret rendezvous, or military testing in restricted zones. While these ideas stretch plausibility, they speak to the powerful aura of Death Valley, a place that devours certainty as readily as it does the unprepared. And then there are those who view the story less as a conspiracy and more as a cautionary tale, a tragic collision of naivety and nature, of unfamiliar terrain and extreme conditions. Death Valley does not forgive mistakes. It does not yield easily to the lost. Still, the disappearance of the Death Valley Germans continues to haunt the imagination, not only because of what happened, but because of what might have happened. In the silence that surrounds their story, the unanswered questions remain louder than any resolution. Did they meet their fate alone? Or did something or someone change their course? And why did so many signs, so many clues go unnoticed for so long? In the end, the desert remains indifferent. The sun still rises over the jagged ridgelines, the wind still stirs the dust through empty canyons, and beneath it all, the ground keeps its secrets. Somewhere between the scorching daylight and the cold of desert night, between what we know and what we can only guess, the truth waits. As we move from the sun-scovered silence of the Mojave into the cooler high plains of northeastern New Mexico, the tone shifts, but the sense of unease lingers. The deserts may bury their dead in sand, but here the past clings more stubbornly. In Cimarron, time doesn't vanish. It lingers in the shadows, in the dry wind that whistles through the canyon, and in the worn floorboards of a hotel where history has left behind something heavier than dust. The St. James Hotel stands like a sentinel at the edge of a quiet town that once pulsed with lawlessness. Built in 1872 by Henry Lambert, President Lincoln's former personal chef turned frontier entrepreneur, the two-story adobe building was meant to bring luxury to a lawless land. But what it invited instead was violence. To walk its creaking hallways today is to step into the raw nerve of the Old West. The architecture is simple but sturdy. Thick walls, row-iron fixtures, and narrow halls that echo with every footfall. The saloon remains much as it was. Polished wooden bar, brass spittoon, heavy beams overhead. But look closer and you'll find a small chilling detail, perhaps easy to overlook at first glance. In the ceiling above the saloon, over a dozen bullet holes remain, not recreated, not restored. Original, each one a scar in the building itself, a reminder of the chaos that once unfolded beneath its roof. According to the hotel's ledgers and oral accounts, as many as 26 men were killed within its walls during its most violent years. Gunfights broke out over poker hands, land disputes, and simmering rivalries. It's said that Lambert himself installed double-thick walls and refused to rent rooms 18 and 19 to multiple guests out of concern for their safety. But there is one room that no one, not even the boldest cowhand, dared to stay in alone. Room 18. Even now, the door is often locked, not by staff, but by tradition. Inside, the air feels colder. The atmosphere is somehow heavier. Former owners have reported objects moving on their own, lights flickering without cause, and a persistent sensation of being watched. One visitor claimed the mirror fogged without reason, revealing handprints too large to be his own. The stories might be dismissed as local lore until one examines the historical record more closely. This was not just any stopover on the frontier. The St. James Hotel was host to some of the most notorious figures in American Western history. Jesse James stayed here. So did Billy the Kid, Buffalo Bill Cody, Bat Masterson, and Wyatt Earp. According to guest registries, some preserved, others reconstructed from recollections, these men crossed paths within these very walls. Could the ghosts of such volatile personalities have left something behind? That question isn't just poetic. Many believe the hotel absorbs the energy of its guests, and that the more violent or emotionally charged the presence, the more likely it is to linger. One of the most persistent stories centres around a figure known only as Thomas James Wright, a man who in the late 1800s reportedly won the deed to the hotel in a poker game held in the saloon. The tale goes that Wright stood up, took a step toward the stairs, and was shot in the back by another player. He allegedly crawled to room 18, where he bled out overnight. Though no historical record definitively confirms this account, it has become inseparable from the room's reputation. Some even say Wright's blood was never entirely removed, that beneath the newer flooring lies a stain the wood refused to release. Paranormal investigators drawn by the intensity of the lore have reported strange electromagnetic fluctuations in room 18. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain, audio equipment records static that when played back sometimes contains faint voices, indistinct, strained and always brief. And yet skepticism remains strong. Could these be tricks of suggestion, misinterpretations of natural phenomena, or the result of living memory becoming myth? Local historians argue that while the hotel has seen violence, the exact number of deaths is likely exaggerated. Others point to the cultural momentum of ghost tourism, that the mystery persists because people want it to. Still, there are curious details that resist dismissal. One staff member in the early 2000s reportedly quit without explanation after being assigned to clean room 18. She was found standing in the hallway, pale, holding her cleaning supplies and refused to ever return to the second floor. Another incident involved a guest who insisted on staying in the room despite warnings. He left abruptly in the middle of the night, refusing to speak about his experience, but left a handwritten note on the bed, reading simply, "Some things don't want to be found." Is room 18 haunted, or does the mind conjure ghosts where stories already exist? And what of the blood-stained walls that to this day refuse to be painted over or removed? Are they remnants of actual violence or carefully curated theatre? Either way, the line between history and legend here is paper thin. In Simran, the air is dry, but it feels dense with memory. Locals speak of the hotel with reverence and sometimes unease. They say that once you've stayed a night there, part of you doesn't leave, that some dreams cling longer than they should, and perhaps that's the real mystery. Not whether ghosts walk the halls of the St. James Hotel, but whether in a place steeped so deeply in blood and memory, it's possible to ever walk away untouched. The echoes of gunfire may have faded from the bullet-riddled ceilings of the St. James Hotel, but not far to the west, across the harsh desert and into the jagged silhouettes of the Superstition Mountains, a different kind of silence prevails. One not of history remembered, but of secrets swallowed whole. Here in central Arizona, the land speaks with a quiet gravity. The mountains rise suddenly from the Sonoran Desert, their peaks serrated like ancient blades. By day, they shimmer in a dry heat that distorts distance and direction. By night, they settle into a stillness broken only by the wind's low moan through saguaro arms and the distant cry of unseen animals. The Apache called this place Thunder Mountain, and for centuries they told stories of the spirits that guard it. But among the many tales that circle these stone sentinels, one has proven remarkably enduring: the legend of missing Apache gold. The story is rooted in a time of transition and bloodshed. In the mid to late 1800s, the American frontier pushed ever deeper into the traditional lands of the Apache. Conflict was inevitable. Skirmishes turned to war, treaties were broken, and cultures collided under the strain of manifest destiny. The US cavalry and settler militias clashed with Apache bands that knew the terrain better than any map ever could. It was during this era, violent, chaotic, and poorly documented, that the legend took root. According to some versions of the tale, the Apache discovered a vein of incredibly pure gold somewhere deep in the Superstition Mountains. Others claim it was not discovered, but remembered. A sacred place known only to select tribal leaders. For generations, the gold was not for trade or greed, but ceremonial, spiritual, part of something larger than wealth. But as pressure from white settlers and military expeditions increased, the Apache were said to have made a deliberate decision. They would hide the gold. Some say they sealed the entrance to the mine with stones and curses. Others say they collapsed it entirely, burying it forever. A few even claim the location was entrusted to a single guardian who vanished before he could be captured or betrayed. But whether the gold was hidden or never existed, what followed was a different kind of search, one driven not by survival, but by obsession. Treasure hunters, soldiers, and adventurers poured into the region in the decades that followed, drawn by whispers of hidden wealth in the sun-scorched mountains. Many would never return. Even as early as the 1880s, newspaper articles hinted at strange disappearances in the Superstitions. lone travellers who set out with maps or rumours only to vanish into the jagged landscape. Skeletal remains were sometimes found months or years later, picked clean by animals and heat. Others simply disappeared. Some connected these tragedies to the so-called Apache gold. Others blamed dehydration, poor preparation, or a failure to respect the dangers of the terrain. But as the body count rose, the legend grew darker. Could something be protecting the site? One version of the tale insists that Apache spirits still guard the gold, that those who seek it with greed in their hearts are doomed. Another theory is more grounded but no less chilling. Remnants of the tribe or secretive descendants still protect the location, watching from the cliffs and canyons, ensuring the mine remains hidden. Even modern expeditions equipped with GPS, drones and satellite imagery have failed to turn up credible evidence. Small flakes of gold have been found in the area, but nothing to match the legend's promise of a hidden motherlode. Skeptics, of course, see a different picture. They argue the entire legend is a composite story from disparate sources folded into one larger myth. The gold, they say, was likely fictional or a simple exaggeration born from miners' tall tales. Some researchers suggest the origin of the legend may have merged over time with the better-known story of the Lost Dutchman mine, a mystery with its own labyrinth of contradictions and theories, often overlapping with those surrounding the Apache gold. But then there are the anomalies. In 1949, a prospector named James A. Cravey disappeared after telling friends he had uncovered clues to the gold's location. His burrow returned without him, laden with tools. His body was never found. In 1973, a hiker stumbled upon a cave high in a narrow canyon filled with what he described as strange carvings and blackened stones that seemed too precise to be natural. When he returned the next week with a companion, the cave had vanished, collapsed or concealed by a landslide. Means, was it an illusion brought on by heat and isolation, or was something hidden and quickly protected? The Apache themselves have spoken little on the matter. For many elders, the stories of the mountains are sacred and not for outsiders to decode or exploit. They speak instead of respect, for the land, for the spirits within it, and for the cost of forgetting one's place in the natural order. What's perhaps most compelling about the legend is not the promise of riches, but the quiet defiance of the land itself. In a world that increasingly yields its secrets to satellites and software, the superstitions remain stubbornly opaque, as if they've made a pact with the past, refusing to surrender it. So the question remains, is there gold hidden deep within those canyons, protected by stone and memory? Or is the real treasure something intangible, a reminder that not all stories can be solved, not all places tamed? Somewhere beyond the trailhead, the sun slips behind the jagged peaks. The air cools, shadows stretch long, and out there in the ancient silence, the truth waits. Buried perhaps in stone, or perhaps only in the hearts of those who once called this land home. As the superstition mountains recede behind us, their secrets held tight by stone and legend, we travel northeast across the arid lands of Arizona into the softer green dappled terrain of Indian Territory. Here, where the rivers bend through low hills and heavy oaks, another mystery lingers, less ancient perhaps, but no less haunting. It is February. The year is 1889. A quiet road near the Canadian River in what is now Oklahoma cuts through open land, rimmed by skeletal trees and rustling grass. Along this lonely track, a woman lies face down in the mud. Her riding hat is missing. Her horse stands nearby, rein tangled, and in her back are 2 shotgun wounds. She's 41 years old and her name is Belle Starr. Known in her time as the Bandit Queen, Belle Starr was already a figure woven into the mythology of the American frontier. Her life had straddled the blurred boundary between legend and truth, an outlaw in some stories, a mother and rancher in others, and though much has been written of her exploits, it is her final moment, brutal, sudden, and unresolved, that remains the most enduring mystery. Who killed Bella, and why? Born Myra Maybelle Shirley in Missouri in 1848, Belle's early years were shaped by upheaval. The Civil War divided her family and devastated her home region. Raised with a formal education, including time at a finishing school, Belle was an unlikely candidate for outlaw status. But after the war, she gravitated toward men who lived outside the law. Her associations read like a who's who of frontier infamy. She married Jim Reed, a known criminal, and later formed ties with the younger brothers and the James Gang. After Reed's death, she married Sam Starr, a Cherokee man with deep connections in the criminal underworld of Indian Territory. The two ran a loose network of horse thieves, bootleggers, and fugitives from a cabin near Eufaula. But Belle was not just a passive participant. Court records show she was arrested multiple times and convicted at least once. She was said to dress in velvet and ride side saddles with a pistol on each hip. And she had a sharp tongue, feared not just for her weaponry, but for her intelligence. By the time of her death, however, Belle Starr had mellowed, at least by some accounts. Her second husband was dead, and she lived on her property with her children and occasional lovers. Though her name still evoked images of rebellion and danger, the reality may have been more subdued, which makes her murder all the more mysterious. According to witness accounts, Belle had ridden into town the day before her death and returned home in the evening. What happened next is unclear. The next morning, a passerby discovered her body on the roadside not far from her cabin. She had been shot at close range with a shotgun, once in the back and once in the face. Her horse, spooked but unharmed, stood nearby. There was no robbery, no message, no known motive. Lawmen questioned several suspects. One was Edgar Watson, a tenant and occasional suitor. He had a criminal record and a reputation for violence. Some claimed Belle had refused to rent him land. Others suggested he feared she would inform him, yet no charges were filed. Watson denied involvement until his own death years later. Another theory pointed to Belle's son, Eddie Reed. Some said they had argued over inheritance or discipline. A few even hinted at deeper tensions, but again, no proof emerged. Others whispered about rivalries, former lovers, old enemies, jealous neighbours. Indian Territory was still wild in the 1880s, and justice was often elusive. The shotgun, common and untraceable, left a little evidence. In the absence of answers, the myth grew. Newspapers, eager for sensation, leaned into the drama. Belle Starr was romanticised, painted as both victim and villain, seductress and saint. Dime novels fictionalised her life, casting her as a female Jesse James. Songs were written, films would follow. Yet behind the stylised imagery lies a murkier, more human story. What kind of life did Belle truly lead in her final years? Was she a woman haunted by her past or still actively involved in crime? Did she make enemies through betrayal or through the simple act of survival in a lawless land? Could her death have been personal, even intimate? And what of the detail that continues to trouble historians? The 2 gunshots, one in the back, one in the face. Was it overkill, a message, or simply the method of a panicked or determined killer? One curious wrinkle adds to the intrigue. For years after her death, visitors to the Starr property claimed to hear strange sounds. Hoofbeats with no rider, whispered arguments, cries that vanished into the trees. Some even say the wind through the grass carries Belle's voice, sharp and defiant, demanding answers that never came. Of course, such stories are easy to dismiss as folklore. The ghosts of the Wild West tend to linger in imagination more than reality. But perhaps that is the real power of Belle Starr's legacy. Not just her life of contradiction, but the questions her death refuses to answer. Was she killed for vengeance or for silence? Did someone fear her secrets more than her fame? Or did the Bandit Queen simply fall victim to the same randomness that haunted so many lives in the untamed West? Her grave lies beneath a simple stone marker near Porum, Oklahoma. It reads, "She never shirked her duty to a friend, nor quailed at the presence of an enemy," a fitting epitaph. And yet the land around it remains quiet, watching, waiting, still holding the truth just out of reach. As the trail winds northward from the dusty grave of Belle Starr, we enter another harsh and storied landscape, one not softened by memory or myth. In southeastern Utah, a network of high desert canyons cuts into the red sandstone plateau, forming a labyrinth of shadows, sheer cliffs, and hidden alcoves. This is Robert's Roost. To the uninitiated, it's a beautiful but desolate region, sun-bleached and unforgiving with rock formations sculpted by wind and centuries. But to those who know its history, the Roost is more than geology. Its legacy, its legend, and somewhere within its maze of slot canyons and brush-choked passes, a mystery still smoulders, one of fire, death, and silence. The story begins, as many Western legends do, with isolation. In the late 1800s, Robbers Roost served as a stronghold for outlaws seeking refuge from the law. The Wild Bunch, Butch Cassid's gang, used the region as a hideout. Its convoluted terrain is nearly impossible for lawmen to track. With narrow entry points and towering cliffs, the Roost became a sanctuary for the lawless. But long after Cassidy and his crew had vanished into history, whispers continued to rise from the redstone corridors. One such whisper begins with a rancher. His name has been lost or perhaps never known. Sometime in the early 20th century, local stories tell of a man who built a homestead deep within Robbers Roost, alone, removed from the growing reach of modern roads and towns. Some say he was a recluse, others an outlaw in hiding. A few claimed he was a Confederate veteran who had simply never returned to the world after the war. What's known is that he lived off the land, trading rarely and speaking little, and then one day, he vanished. His homestead, later stumbled upon by hikers or perhaps a survey team, it depends on the retelling, was found burned to the ground. Not weathered, not collapsed, burned. Charred wood and scorched earth, all that remained. In the ashes, the blackened remains of a man were found curled on what had once been a bed frame. The authorities, such as they were, investigated, but the remoteness of the site and the lack of proper documentation meant little could be determined. The man had no official identification, no surviving neighbours and no clear past. His name, if it was ever known, was never recorded in newspapers. And so the questions began. Was it a tragic accident? A fire sparked by a lantern or wood stove in the night? Or was it something more deliberate? Some accounts hint that the body had wounds not consistent with smoke or flame, that the position of the body seemed unnatural, the fire oddly contained. A few local ranchers speculated that the blaze had been set after death, not during. And then there's the matter of what wasn't found. No tools, no supplies, no remnants of livestock. For a man who had lived off the grid, there was curiously little left behind, as if someone or something had removed all trace of his existence, save for the burned shell of his cabin and his own scorched skeleton. Over time, the story faded from public memory, surviving mainly through oral tradition in nearby towns like Hanksville and Green River. But every so often, a variation would surface. One version claimed the rancher had been hiding stolen gold, loot from an earlier heist carried out by descendants of the Wild Bunch. Another told of a stranger who came through the area weeks before the fire, asking questions about a hermit and carrying a rifle wrapped in cloth. Some even whispered of ancient curses tied to the land itself, pointing to older, more sacred stories passed down by the Ute people, whose ancestors had long avoided certain areas of the Roost. Places, they said, where spirits watched, but most explanations remained earthbound. Perhaps the man was a fugitive. Perhaps someone found out who he was or what he had. A dispute, a betrayal, a moment of violence buried by time and distance. And yet, there is still something deeply unsettling about how little is known. For a place so famous for sheltering fugitives, it's fitting that even its modern ghosts remain elusive. The mysterious burned rancher, as he has come to be called in certain circles, may never have wanted to be found in life. In death, he has succeeded. Today, few visitors stray that far into the Roost. The terrain remains harsh, the trails unmarked, but those who do report strange sensations near the charred ruin, whose foundation still clings faintly to the sandstone floor. A cold stillness, a quiet that doesn't feel quite right. As with many mysteries of the Old West, we are left with fragments, half-remembered accounts, regional lore, and traces of fire where a man once lived. Was he simply a loner caught in a tragic accident? Or did he fall victim to the same lawless forces that once ruled the Roost and more unsettling still? Did someone go to great lengths to erase his story? And if so, what were they trying to hide? The Redstone keeps its secrets well, and Robbers Roost, even in the modern day, guards its ghosts like it once guarded outlaws. Deep in its canyons, beyond the reach of justice or memory, the Utah desert fades behind us, its scorched remnants of a vanished man dissolving into the long twilight of Western legend. We follow the whisper of rivers southward, now down through the canyons and mesas into the wide, rugged plains of New Mexico. Here, where cottonwoods cluster along the water and dust clings to old wagon trails, another secret waits. Buried, some say, beneath the shifting banks of the Pacos River. The Pios has always been more than just a river. For centuries, it has carved a path through isolation and violence, witness to everything from Spanish expeditions and Apache raids to cattle drives and Confederate retreat. It winds through the past like a scar, and somewhere along its muddy course, legend tells of gold, a hoard of it. The tale begins, at least in written history, with soldiers. In the early 1860s, as the American Civil War spilled into the Southwest, Confederate forces attempted to assert control over New Mexico. After the Battle of Glorieta Pass in 1862, often called the Gettysburg of the West, retreating Confederate troops allegedly carried with them a cache of stolen gold, coins, jewelry, and raw bullion taken from Union stores and sympathetic ranchers. Their plan, according to law, was to hide the treasure until they could regroup. They never did. Stories claim that near the Poss River, some say close to present-day Fort Sumner, others near the Poss PBLO ruins, the soldiers buried their ill-gotten fortune marked only by subtle landmarks, a twisted juniper, a crescent of rock, a dry spring. It was meant to be retrieved later. It never was. But is there any truth to it? What we know for certain is that the Confederacy did stage operations in New Mexico, and that their forces suffered a significant defeat at Glorieta Pass. Historical records confirm a chaotic retreat, and some reports mention missing payrolls and confiscated goods. Whether that included gold and whether it was buried is a different matter. Decades later, in the late 1800s, a different version emerged. According to this telling, the treasure wasn't Confederate at all but Spanish, perhaps part of a lost shipment from El Camino Royal, the royal road that linked Mexico City to Santa Fe. Caravans loaded with gold from northern mines were known to travel the route, often guarded by soldiers. Raiders, Apache or Comanche, sometimes ambushed them. In one version, a small Spanish detachment was forced to bury their cargo near the Pios before being wiped out. The location was marked on a crude map which surfaced years later in an estate sale in Chihuahua. A handful of treasure hunters took that story seriously. Some even claimed success. In the 1930s, a ranch hand near Puerto Duna claimed to have unearthed several old Spanish coins while digging a post hole. Others told of strange mounds along the riverbanks that collapsed to reveal rusted iron boxes, always empty, or so the stories went. Was it a coincidence, or were those boxes once full? Then there are the accounts of lights. Throughout the mid-10th century, travellers reported odd sightings along remote stretches of the Pose. Pale flickers dancing above the ground like lanterns swinging in the wind where no one stood. Others spoke of men in old military garb seen at dusk, fading as quickly as they appeared. The connection to the gold legend is tenuous, but hard to ignore in a region where superstition and history intertwine. Local historians have tried to separate fact from fiction, combing through military records, Spanish transport manifests and old mining claims. The results are inconclusive. For every lead, there is a dead end. For every map, a forgery. Yet, the Pios River does not give up its secrets easily. Its banks shift with each flood season. What might have been shallow ground 150 years ago could now lie beneath 10 FT of hardened silt. Old trails have vanished, landmarks eroded. Even with modern equipment, searching along the post remains an exercise in patience and belief. And then there's the question, if gold were found, would anyone tell? In such a remote area with little oversight and a long tradition of private land, any discovery could easily be concealed. Perhaps the hoard has already been found, melted down and spent. Or perhaps it's still out there, buried beneath mesquite roots and cattle tracks, waiting. The real allure of the Poss hoard isn't just in the gold, it's uncertain. The way a story persists quietly over generations, told on porches, whispered in bars, scrolled in the margins of dusty journals. Why does this story endure? Is it because we need to believe that treasure still exists, something tangible, waiting to reward the persistent or the lucky? Or is it because in a landscape so vast and unyielding, the idea of hidden riches lends a kind of purpose, a glimmer of order and an otherwise indifferent wilderness? Whatever the reason, the Poss continues to flow, muddy and patient, bearing witness. Beneath its surface, clay and stone conceal centuries of stories. Some are recorded, others lie silent. But the hoard, that question remains. Did gold ever truly lie buried by those waters? Or is the real treasure something else? Proof perhaps that the myths of the Wild West still breathe just beneath the surface. As the waters of the Pios River slip past and vanish into the flatlands of eastern New Mexico, the terrain begins to change. Subtle at first, but unmistakable. Rolling grasslands stretch wide under an immense sky, their edges meeting low hills and distant plateaus like something drawn in charcoal. It is here in the heart of Union County that the railroad town of Clayton rises like a breath held between two centuries. Dusty and weathered, Clayton seems an unlikely stage for a haunting. And yet in this quiet place, history has left behind more than just empty tracks and faded storefronts. It has left a shadow, a name, a noose, and some say, a ghost. The legend of Blackjack Ketchum begins not with the supernatural, but with blood, steel, and robbery. Born Tom Ketchum in Texas during the mid-1860s, he would come to be known by the nickname Blackjack, a name likely borrowed or bestowed for his dark clothing and reputation for violence. He and his brother Sam roamed across the Southwest during the final gasps of the outlaw era, staging train robberies, holding up stagecoaches and living on the edge of the law. They operated primarily in New Mexico, Colorado and Texas, never gaining quite the infamy of Butch Cassidy or Jesse James, but feared enough to be remembered in legend. By the late 1890s, the Ketchum gang was known to lawmen and bounty hunters alike, but Tom's story would take its most gruesome turn on August 16, 1899. Riding alone, Blackjack Ketchum attempted to rob a train operated by the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railway. It was a bold move and a fatal one. This particular train had already been targeted weeks earlier by his former gang, and the railroad was prepared. As he approached, rifle in hand, the armed crew opened fire. Blackjack was shot, captured and transported badly wounded to Clayton. He survived the injury but would not survive justice. In April 1901, Blackjack was sentenced to death by hanging. The first man in New Mexico territory to be executed specifically for attempted train robbery under a law later deemed unconstitutional. But it was not only the verdict that would seal his place in legend, it was the execution itself. On the morning of April 26th, a crowd gathered at the gallows in Clayton, hungry for spectacle. As Blackjack stood on the scaffold, he reportedly shouted final words to the crowd. Accounts differ, but many say he expressed defiance, even humour in the face of death. The trapdoor fell and so did his head. The noose had been tied incorrectly, and the rope was too long for Ketchum's weight. The force of the fall resulted in decapitation, an execution so gruesome that it made national headlines and caused public outcry. The image of a headless outlaw still dressed in black left an impression far more chilling than any bullet or crime scene. But the story didn't end there. Over time, strange reports began to circulate around Clayton, and more specifically the area near the old courthouse in Gallows, which stood for years after the execution. Witnesses described seeing a tall figure in a black coat walking silently through the streets near dawn. Others spoke of an eerie, headless silhouette riding a horse along the old rail lines on moonless nights. Was it mere folklore? An echo of communal guilt or something else entirely? Some claim the ghost of Blackjack Ketchum was restless, not for vengeance, but for justice. That he'd been wrongfully hanged under a law never meant to carry the death penalty. Others believed the violence of his execution had trapped his spirit in a liminal space, forever tied to the moment of his death. Paranormal investigators visiting Clayton in the 1990s and early 2000s noted anomalous readings near the site of the old gallows. Locals told of flickering lights in windows long since abandoned and of doors opening in the historic courthouse when no one else was present. One visitor claimed they saw a dark figure standing motionless beside the railroad at dawn, only to vanish as the sun touched the horizon. Skeptics, of course, offer more grounded explanations, hallucinations, atmospheric interference, even the power of suggestion. After all, how much of a haunting is shaped by what we expect or fear to see? Still, the legend endures. Blackjack Ketchum was buried just outside town in an unmarked grave that has since been identified. Some say his spirit is not tied to the place of burial, but to the site of execution, where his death shocked a nation, and where a legal misstep turned into a grim spectacle. Even today, those who pass through Clayton sometimes pause at the historic district. They stand near the spot where the gallows once stood, now commemorated quietly with little fanfare, and they wonder, was justice done here? Or was this one more cautionary tale in a lawless land where retribution moved faster than reason? What lingers in the air is not always wind. Could it be the last breath of a man whose life straddled the line between myth and memory? Or is it simply the echo of a world that never fully settled, where legends were born not in glory, but in shadows? In the strange silence that follows such thoughts, it's easy to imagine Blackjack Ketchum still riding, not with guns drawn or loot in hand, but seeking something the Old West rarely offered to men like him: peace. As the ghost of Blackjack Ketchum fades into the dusty streets of Clayton, we drift westward once more into the hazy, wind-worn expanse of frontier New Mexico and Arizona, where gunsmoke once curled over saloons, and the silence of the desert was broken only by hoofbeaters and revolvers. It's a place shaped by legends and haunted by what was left behind. Among the whispering mosquito and crumbling ruins of forgotten outposts, stories persist, not just of buried treasure or unmarked graves, but of a more intimate relic: a diary, a simple leather-bound journal said to belong to an anonymous gunslinger whose name may never be known, but whose words, if found, could rewrite a chapter of the American West. They call it the Lost Gunslinger's Diary. What was written inside, and why has it never surfaced? The earliest known reference to the diary comes from a 1902 letter, discovered in a trunk in Tombstone, Arizona. The letter, written by a schoolteacher to her sister in New Orleans, makes a passing mention of the old journal the sheriff showed me, the one from the drifter who died near Skeleton Canyon. He said it was full of strange things. No name, no clear origin, just that. The journal of a drifter. Skeleton Canyon, straddling the border between Arizona and New Mexico, is infamous in its own right, a place steeped in bloodshed. It was there in 1881 that the Hurt brothers and their posse pursued Mexican smugglers. It was also a corridor used by rustlers, Apaches, and outlaws moving between territories. If any place held secrets, this narrow passage through the Pelanilo Mountains certainly would. The diary reportedly surfaced after a wounded man was found near the canyon. Delirious, his face sunburned, his body riddled with bullets, he died before giving his name. In his possession, a pistol, a silver coin from 1868, and a journal, battered but intact. According to second-hand accounts, the diary contained cryptic entries. The man wrote of travelling alone, avoiding bounty hunters, and hiding something too dangerous to speak of. He referenced known events, gunfights in Bisbee, a robbery near Lordsburg, but with unfamiliar details as if he'd been present yet unrecorded by history. There was also mention of a black book passed among a group of writers who called themselves the Ash Writers, a name not recognised in official records, but whispered in outlaw lore. What was this book? Some believe it was a coded ledger of killings for hire, names, dates, towns, a contract killer's journal. Others suggest it was a spiritual text of sorts, something strange and prophetic written by a man who believed he had witnessed more than just violence, but something otherworldly, an omen. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the diary vanished. The sheriff who had originally shown it was later reported killed in an ambush. His office ransacked, papers stolen. The diary was never mentioned again in official correspondence. For decades, the legend lay dormant until the 1970s, when a prospector near Clifton, Arizona claimed to have found a fragment of weathered parchment in a rusted tobacco tin buried beneath a rock can. The writing, barely legible, read, "They think I'm dead. I left the book where the sun never warms and bones lie blind. Is it connected or coincidence?" More recently, in the early 2000s, a private collector from El Paso claimed he had once seen the diary passed briefly through an estate sale, tied to a defunct ranch near Silver City. He described it as thin. The leather cover burned at the corners, the ink faded but was still legible. He remembers a single line. They buried truth beside the trail and lies rose up like weeds. Attempts to trace the diary since have yielded nothing. Why would someone want to hide or destroy it? If it truly belonged to a gunslinger, could it name names never meant to be revealed? Identities of accomplices, lawmen gone bad, vigilantes operating outside the stories we know? Or was it simply the final testimony of a lonely man trying to leave his mark? In the lore of the West, diaries are rare. Outlaws didn't keep journals. Silence was their currency. To document your life was to leave a trail, and trails were dangerous things, which is why the idea of this diary, a written confession, or perhaps a map to secrets untold, is so compelling. Is it buried still beneath the sand and stone of Arizona's backcountry? Or resting in a forgotten archive, misfiled and anonymous? Even now, historians, collectors and amateur sleuths continue to search. Some scour estate sales and antique shops. Others hike deep into desert canyons with metal detectors and weathered clues passed through generations. And a few search not for gold or guns, but for ink. Words on parchment. The inner world of a man who may have been forgotten by time, but who through his own hand tried not to be. The lost gunslinger's diary may or may not exist, but in the landscape of the Wild West, where fact and fiction are so often indistinguishable, that doesn't make it any less powerful. If found, could it confirm long-rumoured conspiracies? Or tell us only what we already knew, that the life of an outlaw was more shadow than substance? And perhaps the bigger question is this: do we search for the diary because we want to know the truth, or because part of us fears that the truth is something we were never meant to?